Hello everyone, welcome back to GraveTales. I know many of you enjoy listening to these videos as you fall asleep. I want you to leave a comment on where in the world you're tuning in from, and if you're enjoying the story, be sure to like and subscribe. Alright, now let's get into tonight's stories. It started with something so small I almost didn't even notice. Just a single photo in my phone's gallery that I didn't remember taking. I was lying in bed one night doing what I always do, scrolling mindlessly through social media, checking the news, maybe watching a stupid video or two to make myself tired. My room was dark, the only light coming from the phone screen reflecting off my face. I had set an alarm for work the next day, and as I swiped to close all my open apps before locking the phone, I accidentally hit the photos icon. That's when I saw it. A photo at the very top of my camera roll that I didn't recognize. It looked like it had been taken recently. Timestamped at 3:03 a.m., just about 10 minutes before I opened the app, but I hadn't used my camera all day. The thumbnail was dark and grainy, and I tapped it out of curiosity. When it opened, my stomach flipped. It was a photo of me, lying in bed, eyes closed, sleeping. The angle was strange, like it was taken from the corner of my room near the ceiling, looking slightly down at me. I stared at the image for a long time, trying to rationalize it. My first thought was that I must have taken it myself at some point and just forgotten. Maybe I set a timer or recorded a video and a frame was saved as a photo. But that didn't make sense. I don't take photos of myself sleeping, and I live alone. I checked the details, location services were off, as they always were for privacy, and there were no signs the image had been edited or manipulated. It just existed. My heart started to beat faster as the silence of my room seemed to deepen around me. I turned on my bedside lamp, suddenly very aware of the shadows pooling in the corners of the room. I looked toward the spot where the photo seemed to have been taken, near the top corner where the walls and ceiling met. There was nothing there. No shelf, no ledge, just empty wall. I told myself maybe it was a glitch. Maybe my phone duplicated an image and scrambled the metadata. I deleted the photo, powered off my phone, and turned over to sleep. But I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up, checking the time, feeling watched. Once I even sat up and looked around in the dark, feeling a chill even though the air was still. The next morning, I chalked it up to a bad dream. I even wondered if I hallucinated the whole thing. But that illusion shattered when I checked my phone at work the next day during lunch. There was another photo. This one taken at 2:47 a.m. Again, it was me, asleep in bed, different angle. This time it was slightly closer to the side of my bed. The weird part, my arm was hanging off the edge, and you could see just the slightest part of my closet door in the background. It was open. I never leave my closet open, ever. I have a weird thing about it. I always make sure it's fully shut before I go to sleep. I felt a wave of cold nausea roll over me as I stared at the image. My coworkers were chatting around me in the break room, laughing about something stupid someone said in a meeting, but I couldn't even hear them anymore. I was trying to keep my hands from shaking. This wasn't funny. This wasn't a mistake. Someone or something had taken that photo. I excused myself, went into the bathroom, and locked the stall door. I zoomed into every inch of that image, trying to find a reflection, a shadow, anything to show who or what took it. Nothing. I deleted that one too. That night, I didn't go straight home. I went to the electronics store and bought a motion-activated security camera, one of those little white dome-shaped ones with night vision. I set it up in my room on top of my dresser, pointing directly at my bed. I synced it to my phone so I could review the footage the next day. I also turned my closet light on and left the door open wide. That night, I didn't sleep so easily. Every creak of the house had my eyes snapping open. Every whisper of wind outside my window felt like it was brushing against the edge of something unseen. But the worst part? I woke up at 3:06 a.m. with a start, heart hammering in my chest. I didn't know why at first, but then I saw it. My phone was no longer on my nightstand. It was on the floor, screen down, just barely peeking out from under my bed. I don't remember dropping it. I don't sleepwalk. My heart began to race harder. I turned on the lamp and grabbed the phone. The lock screen glowed, and I unlocked it with trembling fingers. My Photos app had a red notification bubble. One new photo. I opened it. It was me, eyes closed. But I wasn't lying down. I was sitting up, propped against my pillows, with my head tilted sideways like I had nodded off in the middle of reading something. But I hadn't. I'd been lying flat on my side when I fell asleep. The timestamp was 3:04 a.m., 2 minutes ago. 2 minutes. I was still trying to understand how that photo had been taken when I realized something else. In the bottom right corner of the photo, there was a shape, a blurry silhouette, barely visible in the shadow near the foot of my bed. It looked humanoid, like someone was crouched low, just behind the edge of the comforter, holding something that glinted faintly in the light. Maybe a lens. I threw the phone across the room, scrambled out of bed, and turned every light on in the apartment. I checked the locks. I checked every closet, under the bed, behind the shower curtain. Nothing. The windows were locked. The front door was bolted from the inside. I was alone, but I didn't feel alone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my kitchen with a knife in my hand until the sun came up, and then I checked the security camera footage. That's when I found the worst part of all. The footage from the security camera was time-stamped and neatly divided into motion-detected clips, just like the manual said it would be. I watched the earlier ones first, me getting into bed, tossing, turning, flipping my pillow over, the usual boring movements of someone trying to fall asleep. The infrared made everything look ghostly, like I was underwater in some hazy, dreamlike hell. I fast-forwarded through a few hours of relative stillness until I reached 3:04 a.m. That was the timestamp of the photo. That was when everything was supposed to have gone wrong. And as soon as the clip loaded, my breath caught in my throat. There was motion, a faint movement in the far right corner of the frame, just a flicker at first like a trick of the lens or a blur caused by the camera refocusing. But as the seconds crawled forward, that flicker solidified into something else. Something deliberate, something human, a figure, crawling, yes, crawling, out from underneath my bed. I could hardly comprehend it at first. My body reacted before my brain could even catch up. I felt my skin prickle with an electric cold, like I'd just stepped into a freezer. The figure was long-limbed and slow, its movements unnaturally fluid, almost boneless. It slithered more than crawled. It was thin, its limbs disproportionately stretched, and its skin, or whatever covered its body, looked tight and waxy under the camera's night vision. The thing crept toward the foot of my bed with a kind of morbid elegance, as if it had done this 1,000 times before. And then it paused, crouched, waited, watched me. I was there in bed, motionless, totally unaware, like a corpse. And then, God help me, it stood, slowly, uncoiling like a shadow rising off the floor. It leaned forward toward the phone on my nightstand. Its fingers, long and stick-thin, reached out with terrifying precision. The screen briefly illuminated as it touched it. I saw the faint white glow reflecting off the thing's featureless face. It had no eyes, no mouth, just a vague suggestion of features, as though someone had carved a human outline into soft wax and never finished the job. And then it took the picture. I watched, frozen, as the flash of the screen lit up the room for a half-second, capturing that moment, the same photo I had found in my gallery. After that, the thing turned toward me. It leaned in so close to my face that its silhouette swallowed mine entirely. It stayed there, perfectly still. I could hear my own breathing in the real world, shallow and fast, as I watched it linger over me, as if it were sniffing or listening or trying to decide something. Then, without warning, it moved back, almost gliding across the floor, and disappeared underneath the bed again. The recording stopped. I sat in stunned silence for what felt like hours. My mind raced through every possible explanation. Intruder, nightmare, glitch, hallucination, but none of them fit. None of them could explain what I had just seen. I ran to my bedroom, yanked the mattress off the bed frame, flipped the whole thing over, and shined a flashlight underneath. Nothing, just dust and a few lost socks. No way in or out, no crawl space. I couldn't take it anymore. I left. I packed a duffel bag in less than 5 minutes, grabbed my laptop, and left my apartment. I drove to my sister's place across town without even calling first. She looked surprised when I showed up on her doorstep, wild-eyed and exhausted, but she let me in without asking questions. I stayed on her couch for the next few nights, trying to convince myself that whatever happened was tied to the apartment. I even called the landlord and made up some excuse about water damage just to get out of my lease early. He didn't seem surprised, just annoyed. I should have taken that as a warning. The first night at my sister's, I actually slept, heavily, dreamlessly. But on the second night, something happened. Started again. I woke up with that familiar sense of dread clawing at my gut. That animal feeling that someone is standing over you even when you're too afraid to open your eyes. When I finally got the courage to look around, everything seemed fine. The apartment was dark, quiet. My sister's dog was sleeping soundly across the room. But when I looked at my phone, I knew it had followed me. There were 3 new photos, all of them from that night. The first showed me lying on the couch, a blanket pulled up to my chest, just as I had fallen asleep. The second showed me turned slightly on my side, mouth open, completely vulnerable. The third was different. It showed me staring directly at the camera, my eyes wide open, but I didn't remember waking up. I didn't remember looking at anything. It was like some part of me had been conscious in the dark while the rest of me slept, completely unaware of my own actions. I zoomed in on the photo, and that's when I saw it again, in the bottom left corner, barely visible in the grainy light of the phone's flash. 2 long fingers resting on the edge of the coffee table, like it was holding itself in position. Watching. Steady. Silent. I didn't tell my sister. Couldn't. She'd think I was insane. I tried factory resetting my phone, thinking maybe this thing had infected it somehow, like a virus. But even with everything wiped, the next night brought another photo. This one taken outside somehow, of me standing in her kitchen window. But I had never gone outside. I'd never left the couch. I didn't even remember standing up. My sister finally confronted me that morning. She said she heard me talking in my sleep, whispering things, laughing once. Said she almost came out of her room to check on me, but something made her stop. She didn't like the way my voice sounded. She said it didn't sound like me. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I just sat in the living room with every light on, gripping a baseball bat and watching the windows. I knew it wasn't over. I knew it was just beginning. I stayed at my sister's for 3 more nights, never once letting myself sleep for more than a few minutes at a time, and even then only out of complete exhaustion. I had taken to duct taping the camera on my phone, placing it inside a drawer, and checking every few hours to make sure it hadn't moved, but it didn't matter. Every morning there were more photos, always time-stamped between 2 and 4 a.m., always showing me in some position I couldn't remember being in. Sometimes I was lying flat, sometimes sitting upright, once even crouched near the sliding glass door that led to her balcony. Just crouched there in the dark, my eyes wide open, staring out. In that one, you could see my reflection in the glass, but there was something else reflected too, right behind me. A shape, not quite human, not quite solid. I didn't show my sister the photos. I didn't want her involved. I knew by now that it didn't matter where I went or how many times I tried to leave it behind. It was attached to me. Somehow it had latched on. It wasn't just stalking me from the shadows. It was getting closer, getting braver. I could feel it. I left my sister's without warning. Left her a note saying I had to go visit a friend upstate. But that was a lie. I didn't have a plan, just a desperate need to get away. I drove for hours without direction, heading north along the highway with the windows cracked to keep myself awake, letting the cold air slap me in the face every few minutes. I stopped at some roadside motel around 10 p.m., far outside the city. The place was practically deserted, just one flickering neon vacancy sign buzzing like an insect, and a bored clerk who barely looked up when I handed him cash. The room smelled like mildew and old carpet cleaner, but I didn't care. I dragged the dresser in front of the door, pushed a chair under the knob, and shoved a nightstand against the thin bathroom door just in case. I didn't have my phone anymore. I'd thrown it out the window somewhere around exit 67. I figured if it couldn't see me, maybe it couldn't follow me. I had nothing now, just my wallet, a cheap analog watch, and a spiral notebook I'd picked up from a gas station where I wrote down everything that had happened. I figured I'd try to keep track of it all. The timeline, the details, anything that might help me understand what it wanted. That night, I thought I was safe. Without the phone, I thought it couldn't watch me. I was wrong. I fell asleep sometime past midnight, sheer exhaustion finally dragging me under despite the panic. I dreamed of things moving under the bed, of breathless whispers in languages I couldn't understand. When I woke up, the room was silent. Too silent. Not even the hum of the heater. I turned on the light and sat up, and that's when I saw it. Laid neatly on the desk across from the bed was a stack of Polaroid photos. Real Polaroids, the kind you shake and wait to develop. They hadn't been there when I checked in. My heart practically stopped as I reached for them. My fingers trembled as I flipped through the stack. Every single one showed me, sleeping, dozens of them, different angles, some from across the room, others up close. So close I could see the pores in my skin, the flecks of dried saliva at the corner of my mouth, the edge of my half-closed eyelid. One of them, God, I almost dropped it. One of them showed a hand, not mine, resting lightly on my forehead, as though stroking me, watching me. I looked around the room expecting to see it, expecting to find it standing there, smiling without a mouth, but nothing was there, just peeling wallpaper and flickering fluorescent light. That was when I realized something that chilled me more than any image could. I hadn't brought a camera. I hadn't brought a phone. I didn't have a device that could take pictures. The Polaroids hadn't come from me. I checked out immediately. The clerk didn't even blink when I handed him the room key with shaking hands and eyes full of desperation. He didn't ask me anything, didn't offer help. Just took the key and slid it into a drawer like he'd done it 100 times before. I drove again, didn't care where, didn't care if the car gave out. I ended up crashing in a Walmart parking lot, sleeping in the driver's seat with a blanket over my head like a child trying to hide from a nightmare. When I woke up that time, there was something new. It wasn't a photo. It was a single piece of paper, folded and placed neatly on my dashboard. I hadn't heard the door open. I hadn't felt a breeze. It just appeared. I unfolded it slowly. There were no words, just a crude drawing. Pencil, maybe charcoal. It showed a figure. Long skeletal limbs. A round featureless head. It was crouched over something. At first I couldn't tell what. Then I saw the smaller shape underneath it, me, drawn in chilling detail. I was lying on my back, my eyes open, and the creature's hands were placed on either side of my face. It was looking down at me, or maybe into me. The style of the drawing was frantic, scratchy, and dark, like the artist was trembling. But the worst part was the line at the bottom. Small, faint, almost missed it. Not a signature, but a sentence. Scrawled like it had been etched with the last bit of strength someone had left. You are not dreaming. I crumpled the paper and tossed it out the window, but that didn't make it go away. The images kept coming, burned into the back of my eyelids now. No camera needed. Every time I blinked, I saw a new angle of myself sleeping. It was like the thing was showing me what it saw, what it was seeing, constantly, as if our perspectives were starting to bleed together. I wasn't sure what was real anymore. One night, I tried stabbing myself awake. Took a knife to my thigh just to make sure I wasn't dreaming. The pain was real. The blood was real. But when I passed out from the shock, I woke up to a photo taped to the ceiling above me. Me, holding the knife, eyes rolled back in my head, the creature behind me, smiling, or maybe just watching, always watching. It doesn't want to kill me. That's the worst part. It wants to keep watching. And now I think I know why. I used to think the worst part was not knowing what it wanted, but I was wrong. The worst part is slowly beginning to understand. It's not random. It's not just some sick cosmic voyeurism. It's methodical. There's a pattern to it, though it took me weeks of blurred nights and half-lucid terror to start putting it together. After I ran out of places to go, I ended up squatting in an abandoned farmhouse deep in the woods, something I found while following a dirt road off a state highway in the middle of nowhere. The structure was skeletal and collapsed in places, a frame of its former self, but the roof was mostly intact and there was a fireplace I could light at night to keep warm. I had no power, no phone, no mirrors, no windows that weren't boarded shut. I wanted to deprive it of any reflective surface, any glass it could watch me through. I slept during the day and stayed awake through the night, keeping a journal of every feeling, every fleeting image, every shadow that moved too smoothly to be the wind. I still saw the photos, not on screens now, but in dreams. I'd close my eyes for even a second, and there they were, flashing, stuttering frames of myself, always from a distance at first, then closer and closer, until all I could see was my own skin, my pores, my teeth clenched tight in sleep. Sometimes I'd see my eyes open, looking straight into the camera that didn't exist. And behind me, always behind me, was the shape, the blur. It had changed. No longer a featureless wax dummy. It had detail now. Like the more I saw it, the more it became real. As though my recognition was giving it form. The first time I saw its face, I threw up blood. Just black bile and red threads of something that felt too warm and too thick to be just vomit. I saw its mouth, or what looked like a mouth. A vertical slit that went from where its chin should be all the way up to the center of its forehead. The slit never opened, but it pulsed, like it was breathing through it, waiting. The face had no eyes, but I could feel its gaze, like dry ice trailing across my thoughts. It wanted me to see it. I was feeding it somehow. Each photo, each dream, each flicker of awareness added something to its body, like I was sketching it into existence by noticing it. The more I tried to ignore it, the harder it worked to make me look. One night, I woke up to find dozens of charcoal sketches nailed to the walls of the farmhouse. I didn't make them. I don't know who did. Each one was more detailed than the last. Some looked like rough sketches, others were nearly anatomical. Each one showed it, not just watching me, but emerging from me. One had it crawling out of my own mouth while I lay motionless on the floor. Another showed me looking into a mirror, though there were none in the house, and it was reaching through the reflection, hand gently touching my shoulder, as though comforting me. The drawings got into my head. I'd see them when I blinked, when I stared at the fire, when I tried to focus on something as simple as the grain of the wood under my fingers. It was everywhere, and then I started hearing things. Whispers at first, right on the edge of perception, like tinnitus made of words. The sound never stopped. It just hovered, looping phrases that never made sense. Not until I realized they were names. Names I didn't recognize. Names of other people. The first one that stuck with me was Jeremy Beale. I wrote it down without knowing why. The next morning, I walked 5 miles through the woods to a gas station and asked the cashier if I could use their Wi-Fi. I didn't even bother explaining my appearance. Filthy, unshaven, red-eyed. I just pulled out my sister's old tablet she'd given me weeks before and typed the name into a search engine. What I found made my skin seize with a terror so deep I couldn't even breathe. Jeremy Beale, 27. Went missing 2 years ago. Last seen at his apartment in upstate New York. His roommate found dozens of photos on his phone after he disappeared. Photos of Jeremy sleeping, taken from strange angles. Police assumed someone had hacked his cloud storage, but no suspect was ever found. I tried another name, then another, each one real, each one tied to a case. Always missing, always the same pattern. The photos, the shadows, the vanishing. Whatever this thing is, it's done this before, over and over, hundreds, maybe thousands of times, and no one's ever stopped it, because it doesn't kill you, not at first. It just watches until something in you breaks. Watches until you start seeing yourself the way it sees you, vulnerable, exposed, unraveling. I think that's when it takes you, not physically, not like an abduction, more like it folds you out of reality, unthreads you from your own life. People stop noticing you. You stop appearing in mirrors. Reflections grow darker when you pass. I've been watching myself disappear piece by piece. My fingerprints no longer leave marks. My footsteps don't echo. I bled yesterday after cutting my hand on rusted metal, and the blood didn't stick to my skin. It floated there, for a moment, like oil on water, before vanishing. And last night, I saw something I can't explain. I looked into a bucket of rainwater to wash my face, and I saw my reflection. But I wasn't alone. It was behind me, closer than ever. His hands were on my shoulders. I didn't feel them, but I saw them. Long, pale, gentle, like it was claiming me, like it always had been. There's a final stage to all of this, and I think I've reached it. I didn't notice it happening right away, but there were signs. The changes weren't dramatic. They were small, insidious. A friend from high school messaged me on an old account, said he'd seen a photo of me online, that someone had posted an old picture from college and tagged me. Only, I hadn't spoken to him in years, and I haven't had any social media in months. I asked him to send it. When he did, I stared at the screen for 10 minutes, not breathing. It was a group shot, something I remembered vaguely from a party a lifetime ago. But where I should have been standing, in the middle holding a red cup and smiling stupidly, there was just a shadow, a silhouette, no features, no clothing, just a blurry, black void shaped roughly like a person. My name was still tagged. He thought it was a glitch. I didn't reply. I just stared at that void, heart pounding, because I knew what it meant. I'm being overwritten, like a corrupted file. That's what it does. It watches, collects, it records everything, every moment, every night, every twitch and turn of your sleeping body, until it knows you better than you know yourself. And then it begins replacing you, slowly, carefully, like it's editing your existence in reverse. It's not content with just observing anymore. It's curating, rebuilding, taking your life and making it its own. People stop recognizing you. Strangers look at you too long, like they're trying to figure out why your face doesn't sit right in their brain. You show up on cameras slightly wrong. Eyes unfocused, smile off-center, posture too stiff or too slack. I tested it. I found a convenience store with a mirrored wall near the drink coolers. I waited until no one was around, then walked slowly toward it, watching myself come into view. First, everything seemed fine. My reflection was me, tired, dirty, unshaven. But as I got closer, the image started to flicker, barely noticeable, like a skipping video. One frame, my mouth was closed. The next, it was open. Then my eyes blinked out of sync. Then my head turned in the reflection before I moved at all. The final moment, the one that made me leave everything behind. I reached out to touch the mirror, and my reflection didn't. It just stared, then smiled. Not a normal smile, a wide, awful stretching of skin like it didn't quite know how the muscles worked. Then it raised its hand, slowly, almost mockingly, and placed it against the glass, fingers perfectly aligned with mine. I ran. I didn't stop running until I collapsed in a drainage ditch 2 miles from town. That was 3 days ago. I haven't slept since. I don't think I can. Not safely. Every time I close my eyes, I see myself from outside. Not dream fragments, not memories, real-time images, like a live stream I didn't ask to subscribe to. I'm not alone inside my own head anymore. It's watching through me now, watching with me. I hear it when I talk. I feel it when I move. It's learning to be me. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, is that it's better at it than I am. I've started forgetting things, where I left things, who I spoke to, what I said. Sometimes people talk to me like we've just had a conversation I don't remember having. Other times they look confused, unsettled, like I just said something that didn't make sense. I think it's already begun using my voice, saying things through me while I'm unaware, rehearsing, practicing, like trying on a new suit. I found a voicemail on my sister's number last night when I borrowed a burner phone to call her. I never made the call. I know I didn't, but there was a message. My voice, calm, clear, saying things I would never say. Don't worry about me. I'm going somewhere quiet. I need peace. Don't look for me. She texted back with a thumbs up. She believed it. Why wouldn't she? Sounded like me. And that's the final trap, isn't it? Once it can be you better than you can, it wins. It doesn't have to hide anymore. It just steps into your life and keeps walking while you fade out like a background noise. And that's what's happening to me now. I've started flickering. I see my hands fade slightly in dim light. I catch glimpses of my reflection trailing behind me by a fraction of a second. I hear people say my name in rooms I haven't entered. It's here. It's inside. It's replacing me frame by frame, thought by thought. But I still have one thing it doesn't. Awareness. I know it's here. I know it's watching. And I can still fight. Maybe not to win, but to warn. If you're hearing this, if you've ever seen a photo on your phone that you didn't take of yourself asleep, don't ignore it. Don't explain it away. Don't assume it's harmless. Because that's how it begins. One image, one moment of forgetting, and then it starts to know you. Then it starts to want you. You won't see it, not at first. You'll feel it, like the weight of unseen eyes, like a shift in the dark that never quite matches what your brain tells you is possible. And then the photos will come, and then the dreams, and then one day you'll look in the mirror and see something smiling that shouldn't be smiling. Something too still, too perfect, too patient. That's when you'll know it's already begun. I don't know how much longer I have. This will probably be the last thing I ever write. I've left these notes everywhere I've gone. In hotel drawers, tucked into bathroom stalls, carved into the walls of abandoned places. I hope one of them finds you in time. Maybe if enough people know, it can't keep going. Maybe if enough of us refuse to be watched, refuse to be overwritten, it'll vanish. Fade back into whatever corner of reality it crawled out of. Or maybe not. Maybe it's already too late. Maybe it was supposed to be a fun night story too. A stupid, overpriced escape room that my friend Morgan insisted on booking for her birthday because we hadn't done one together in forever, and she'd found a really intense, fully immersive horror-themed one that just opened outside town. The flyer she showed us was deliberately edgy and vague. A grainy black and white image of a cracked door slightly ajar, the words "The Watcher's Nest" scrawled in jagged font above it, and a promise of the most extreme, mind-bending, unforgettable escape experience you'll ever have. It sounded like the kind of place that catered to hardcore puzzle nerds and horror junkies, but Morgan loved this kind of crap, and the rest of us, me, Tyler, Anna, and Daniel, just shrugged and went along. It was a rainy Saturday, cold enough to numb your fingers if you forgot your gloves, and by the time we pulled into the gravel lot outside the warehouse-style building, everyone was in high spirits. The front looked like an abandoned slaughterhouse. Rusted sheet metal walls, no visible windows, and a single red bulb glowing over a heavy wooden door. There was no sign, just a buzzer next to the door and a worn placard that said, "Please arrive promptly. Doors will lock at start time." Morgan hit the buzzer twice. A moment passed, then a sharp click, and the door slowly creaked open on its own. The interior was darker than we expected. Barely lit, smelling faintly of wet wood, smoke, and something slightly sweet, almost metallic. We stepped into a narrow hallway with a low ceiling and red track lighting that cast long, uneven shadows across the walls. At the far end stood a woman dressed in all black, her face covered with a white plague doctor-style mask. She didn't speak. She just held out her hand, palm up, as if asking for something. Morgan handed her the printed confirmation email, and the woman nodded once before turning and walking through a black curtain behind her. We followed like sheep, laughing and nudging each other, the tension already starting to build in that fun, excited way it does before a haunted house or a horror maze. The room she led us to looked like an old Victorian study. Bookshelves lining the walls, a large oak desk in the center, dusty candelabras, and a strange portrait of a man with no eyes above the fireplace. There were 6 chairs, a grandfather clock, and a locked door with a combination keypad next to it. The woman finally spoke then, her voice low and oddly distant, as if she were speaking from another room. "You have 1 hour to escape. The Watcher sees all. The Watcher knows all. Do not cover your eyes. Do not speak to him. Do not disobey." Then she stepped backward into the curtain again and was gone. The door behind us slammed shut and locked with a loud mechanical clunk. The game had begun. At first, it was like any other escape room. Creepy props, dim lighting, atmospheric sound effects. We split into teams and started looking for clues. Tyler found a book with a hollowed-out center containing a brass key. Anna solved a riddle that opened a drawer full of old newspaper clippings. We worked well together. Morgan had a knack for spotting patterns, and Daniel was great at piecing together word puzzles. I mostly just tried not to get in the way. The first real puzzle was solving a code to unlock the grandfather clock, which, when opened, contained a tape recorder with a voice that said, "The watcher remembers the lie. Find the liar. Find the truth." It was creepy, sure, but still within the bounds of typical escape room theatrics. Things started to shift about 20 minutes in. We noticed small inconsistencies. Tyler swore the portrait above the fireplace had changed. He said the man had no eyes at first, but now there were faint pupils behind the paint, almost too faint to see unless you stared. I brushed it off as him imagining things, but Anna agreed. "His mouth is smiling now," she said, and suddenly we were all crowding around it, arguing about whether or not we were seeing what we thought we were. Morgan told us to focus, we were wasting time. But when we turned back to the desk where she'd been working on a cipher, the puzzle had changed. Not just reset, changed entirely. The symbols were different, the clues out of order. It didn't make sense. She looked confused, then annoyed, accusing us of messing with it, but we all denied touching anything. Then came the whispers, faint at first, so faint we couldn't agree on whether we were hearing them at all. But as the minutes ticked on, they became more frequent, more distinct. "Don't look. He sees you. No time." I thought it was a speaker system, maybe a trick to rattle us, until Daniel went completely still, eyes wide, and whispered, "Someone just breathed into my ear." We all turned, expecting to see one of the actors in costume. Maybe the woman in the mask, maybe a new scare. But there was no one, just the six of us. The door we came in through was still locked, and the room was too small for anyone to hide without us noticing. The tension ratcheted up fast after that. The puzzles kept changing. Every time we solved something or made progress, the rules shifted. A combination we had just entered successfully now triggered a loud alarm and reset the room. Notes we'd found earlier were missing. The tape recorder played different messages now, fragmented and frantic. "You have no time. He is here." Lying eyes, lying hands, lying voice. The portrait on the wall was unmistakably changing. Now the man had an open mouth and what looked like teeth, long, blackened things that glistened slightly in the candlelight. No one wanted to admit it, but we were all seeing it. It was undeniable. Morgan tried the panic button, that little emergency release they legally have to provide, but nothing happened. She pressed it again and again, and the only response was a low grinding sound from the walls, like something massive shifting just beyond the plaster. Anna screamed when one of the bookshelves suddenly creaked open on its own, revealing a narrow passage behind it. We were too scared to go in at first, but the main room had begun to feel suffocating, like the air was thicker, heavier, and then the lights flickered and stayed off. Just total, dense black. That decided it. We entered the passage one by one, using our phones for light, except none of them worked. The screens were on, but every display was just static. Static, like old TVs. We stumbled down the corridor, trying to stay calm, trying to reason. It had to be part of the game, right? An elaborate horror experience. Just really well designed. Just acting. Just illusion. But then we reached another room smaller than the last. Stone walls, flickering bulbs overhead, chains hanging from the ceiling, and carved into the wall, deep gouges that hadn't been there before, were words. "The game is you. The exit is never." That's when Tyler started banging on the walls, yelling for help, telling them they'd gone too far. But no one answered. The whispers were louder now, right behind our ears, like breath. And somewhere behind us, in the darkness of the hallway we had just left, we heard something move, something wet, something dragging. We were locked in, and we had no idea what we had actually walked into. We stood frozen in that stone room, the silence around us vibrating with a tension that made my molars ache, like something heavy and ancient was pressed against the walls just beyond our vision, listening to us breathe. Morgan kept trying to convince herself, and us, that this was all just part of the experience, that it was a high-budget escape room with some kind of interactive AI or live elements we weren't warned about. But her voice was starting to fray around the edges, cracking on certain syllables, and the way her eyes darted toward the passage we'd come from betrayed the fear she was trying to hide. Tyler wouldn't even talk anymore. He was pacing the far wall, fingers twitching at his sides, muttering low to himself like he was trying to memorize some detail we'd all missed. like he was rewriting the room in his mind and hoping it would make sense if he could just rewind enough. Anna stood in the corner, gripping one of the rusted chains with white knuckles, her eyes darting toward the gouged message over and over again. The game is you. The exit is never. Daniel kept clicking his phone screen over and over despite the static, like he couldn't accept it was broken, like he was clinging to the one tool that had always worked until now and refusing to believe it wouldn't save him this time. I tried to keep everyone grounded, tried to pull us together, but my voice felt foreign in my throat, dry and full of splinters, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing just behind me the whole time. Never moving, never speaking, but always there, just outside my peripheral vision, waiting for something. The stone room had no door, no puzzles, no visible clues, just the inscription, the hanging chains, and a small hole in the center of the floor, perfectly circular, about a foot wide, too dark to see down, too deep to guess its purpose. We took turns shouting down it, listening for an echo. Nothing, just silence. Then Daniel noticed the symbols, faint etchings along the base of the walls, right where the stone met the floor. They hadn't been visible at first, but as our eyes adjusted to the gloom, the symbols began to stand out. Angular, repeating, but wrong, like a language invented by someone who had never heard a human tongue. Morgan started photographing them out of instinct, even though her camera just displayed more static, and we all stood around trying to guess their meaning like it would anchor us to something real, something logical. That's when we heard the laugh. Not human, not entirely. A sound like glass cracking underwater, like a dozen throats trying to mimic joy without ever having felt it. It echoed from the hole in the floor. That was when Anna snapped. She screamed something incomprehensible and yanked one of the chains from the ceiling, swinging it around, backing into the wall, crying that we weren't alone, that we were being watched, that she could feel it breathing inside her skull. We tried to calm her down, but she was in a full panic now, clawing at the walls, sobbing, repeating the same sentence again and again. The clues are lying. They keep lying. They change when you look away. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the lights above us turned off. But not all at once. One by one, in sequence, like dominoes falling slowly. With each bulb that died, the shadows deepened, expanded, thickened until they felt physical, heavy, alive. I don't know how long we were in the dark. Seconds? Minutes? Long enough to hear the scrape of something long and brittle across the floor, the crackle of dry joints moving too fluidly, the faint whisper of fabric dragging stone. Then light returned, not from the ceiling, but from the walls themselves. The symbols were glowing now, soft red, pulsing like a heartbeat, and Anna was gone. The chain she'd been holding clattered on the floor, swinging in slow circles. We called her name over and over, voices shaking, but she didn't respond. She wasn't in the room. She wasn't in the hallway. She wasn't anywhere. The only new thing we found was a piece of paper tucked under the chain's anchor point, brown, aged, curling at the edges. On it was a single sentence, handwritten in ink so dark it looked wet. She chose to open her eyes. That was the moment I stopped pretending this was still a game. No escape room company would go this far. No company could make people disappear. And even if Anna had somehow slipped into a hidden compartment or was dragged off by actors for a stunt, someone would have broken character by now. But no one came. The woman in the mask was gone. The door we'd entered through hadn't just locked. It had vanished. The bookshelf behind it was flush with the wall again, sealed tight. We were trapped in a space that didn't obey physics or rules or reason. And the worst part? The clues kept changing. Every time we looked away from something and then back again, it was different. The symbols, the arrangement of the chains, even the words gouged into the wall shifted. Sometimes a word would vanish or be replaced. The exit is never became the exile is near, and then he exists as nerve. We couldn't tell what was real anymore. Morgan tried keeping her eyes on a single wall, refusing to blink for minutes at a time, just to see if anything held still. Didn't. The longer she stared, the more the wall began to ripple like skin, like something was beneath it, pushing outward, distorting the stone like a heartbeat. We had to get out. We had to. But the only thing left was the hole in the floor. We debated it, argued, cried, begged each other not to. But in the end, Daniel said it best. It's either down or we die here. So we tied the chains together, tested the length, and one by one we climbed into the hole. We didn't fall. We descended, slowly, like the air was thick, syrupy, dragging us down gently. The hole widened after a few feet, opening into a vertical tunnel of shifting walls. Sometimes brick, sometimes wood, sometimes something soft that flexed under our hands. And the whispers followed us. They never stopped, always behind us, always murmuring things we almost understood, like they were stealing pieces of our own thoughts and echoing them back to us out of order. The descent lasted forever, and when we reached the next room, the horror had only just begun. When we reached the bottom of the shaft, our feet met something soft. Not dirt, not stone, but something in between, like dried fabric stretched over old wood. It gave slightly underfoot, like skin. The chamber we found ourselves in was vast and circular, illuminated not by any light source we could identify, but by a dim red hue that seemed to pulse from the very walls. There were markings, more of those warped, insectoid symbols etched into every surface, spinning across the room in spirals and patterns that seemed to move when you weren't looking. The air was damp and heavy, thick with an earthy, iron smell that reminded me of old coins and rot. It clung to the inside of my nose and throat, like I was breathing through cloth soaked in decay. Morgan kept whispering to herself, hunched forward with her arms wrapped around her chest, her fingernails digging into her sleeves. Tyler, who hadn't spoken since Anna vanished, had started laughing softly under his breath. An uneven, high-pitched chuckle that came in spurts, like he was reacting to a joke only he could hear. Daniel was the only one still talking to me, but even he had changed. His sentences were disjointed, his eyes glassy. When I asked him what he thought the symbols meant, he stared at me blankly for almost a minute before whispering, "They're instructions, but not for us." That phrase has stayed with me. It rang louder than any of the whispers, sharper than the inhuman breathing that echoed up the shaft behind us. This place wasn't just some elaborate prank. It wasn't an immersive horror experience. It was something older, something deeper, something built for something else. At the center of the room was a tall wooden door, at least 10 feet high, curved at the top with no knob or handle. Across its center was a strange symbol, a perfect circle surrounded by jagged lines like thorns, and beneath it, a phrase, "Kneel T.O. open." We stood around it in silence, unsure what to do. Then Tyler, still grinning, still twitching, dropped to his knees with a suddenness that made me jump. He lowered his head to the floor. The door groaned open, not with hinges, but with a tearing sound like flesh being split down the center. Beyond it was pitch black, a hallway or maybe just a void. The red light from our chamber didn't penetrate it. Tyler stood and walked through without hesitation, still chuckling. Morgan followed a moment later, after giving me a look I couldn't read, part apology, part surrender. Daniel and I hesitated. We stood on the threshold, staring into that absence of light, that space that felt like it was staring back. Then the door began to close. Not fast, not slow, just inevitable. We had no choice. We stepped through. And that's when the game really started. The darkness on the other side wasn't absence, it was consumption. It swallowed everything. Light, sound, time. We walked in silence, our footsteps muffled, our breathing shallow. I don't know how long we walked. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. The floor beneath us was smooth and warm, like polished bone, and the walls pulsed gently as if breathing. Eventually, the dark thinned slightly, just enough for us to see vague outlines ahead. A new room, smaller, with mirrors on every wall. But the mirrors were wrong. They didn't reflect us. Not at first. They reflected the room, the floor, the ceiling, but our bodies didn't appear. Only after we stepped fully inside did something begin to form in them. Not us, but warped versions. Twisted doppelgangers. I saw myself first, but thinner, taller. My skin stretched too tight, my limbs slightly too long, my eyes wide and sunken. The figure in the mirror blinked out of sync with me, moved a half second too late, like it was remembering what I did and reenacting it. Daniel gasped and staggered back from his reflection, whispering, "No, no, no," over and over. His mirrored self was crawling. Its mouth was gone, just smooth skin, and its hands were flat against the glass as if trying to push through. Morgan's reflection stood perfectly still, smiling. But she wasn't. She wasn't even looking at it. She was staring at the ceiling, mumbling something about Anna's voice. Tyler, God, Tyler. His reflection was the only one that wasn't moving at all. It just stood there, staring directly at me, eyes black, smiling too wide, like it knew something. Then all the reflections blinked in unison and smiled at the same time. Not our smiles. The smile. We turned to run. But the room had changed. No door, no hallway, just mirrors, mirrors, mirrors. And then the lights above us changed, flickered, turned blue. A speaker crackled to life somewhere above. A voice so distorted it sounded like it was being pushed through gravel. It said, "You've made it to stage 2. Time is memory. Memory is pain. Pain is the key." The mirrors rippled, shifted, and began to show us different things. Not twisted reflections now, but moments. Moments from our lives. Tyler's showed his father hitting him with a belt. Daniel's showed him standing over a gravestone in the rain, sobbing. Morgan's showed a hospital room, a flat line on a monitor, a woman's hand limp in her own. Mine showed a room I barely remembered. My childhood bedroom, the closet door creaking open, something crawling out of it, something with my voice. I dropped to my knees, covered my eyes, but the images kept coming, flashing across the walls, faster, harder, louder. The mirrors began to vibrate. A high-pitched noise filled the air. The lights turned red again, and behind us, one of the mirrors cracked. Just a hairline fracture. Then another. Then another. The room was breaking. Or we were. Morgan screamed something I couldn't make out. The air thickened again. The floor began to tilt. And then the mirrors shattered, exploding inward, revealing black voids behind each one. And from the voids came hands. Long, skeletal, many-jointed hands that didn't move like anything human. They reached out not to grab us, but to gesture, point, toward the center of the room, where a trapdoor had appeared, unmarked, barely visible, but there. And slowly opening, we had no choice but to go deeper. The trapdoor groaned open like it hadn't moved in 100 years, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling downward into darkness that smelled of wet earth and old secrets. None of us said a word. We knew that whatever game we'd signed up for had twisted into something much darker, something alive, something that wanted to watch us break. One by one, we descended, the air growing colder and heavier with each step. My phone's screen, the only faint source of light, flickered weakly, barely penetrating the oppressive black. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a cavernous chamber, lit by torches burning with unnatural blue flames that cast eerie shadows dancing on rough stone walls. The space was cavernous and irregular, as if carved by some ancient, unknowable force. The floor was slick with damp moss and something sticky beneath it that caught at my shoes. We gathered near the center, eyes wide and searching. There, in the middle of the chamber, stood a massive circular table carved from a single slab of dark stone, covered with dozens of objects, some familiar, others grotesque. Candles half melted, animal bones, a cracked porcelain doll missing one eye, a cracked watch frozen at 3:13, and what looked like a thick book bound in leather with strange symbols embossed on its cover. We hesitated, but Morgan, shaky but determined, reached for the book first. The moment her fingers brushed the leather, the room shifted. The torches flickered violently, and the blue flames warped into sickly green before snapping out entirely. For a breathless moment, we were plunged into darkness. Then, a new light, not from flame or bulb, but from the book itself. It opened slowly, pages curling on their own as if flipped by invisible hands. On the first page was a message written in faded ink, in a handwriting so familiar it made my stomach churn. "Welcome back. The game never ends." Each page revealed fragments of our own lives, secrets, memories, regrets, written as though someone had chronicled every detail, every hidden thought, every buried fear. Morgan gasped as she saw the names of her lost friends, some with dates of death scrawled beside them. Tyler froze when a page detailed an accident he'd covered up years ago. Daniel wept silently, the pages showing a past betrayal no one knew about. And I saw the closet door of my childhood bedroom, the same one from the mirror visions, but here it was described in excruciating detail. The page ended with a phrase scrawled in thick red ink. "Do you remember who you are when no one is watching?" The walls around us began to close in slowly, the ceiling descending as the air thickened with despair. We had to move, but the chamber shifted like a living thing. The objects on the table began to move, sliding closer to us on their own. The doll's cracked eye rolled open and fixed on Morgan. The watch's hands began spinning wildly backwards, ticking loudly in the oppressive silence. A deep humming rose from the stones beneath our feet. Then the floor gave way beneath Daniel, and he fell through with a scream. We reached the edge, peering into the dark abyss below, but saw nothing. No sound, no sign of him. Our panic threatened to overwhelm us, but Morgan pushed us forward, insisting we find a way out, or we'd share his fate. We scoured the chamber, trying to decipher more clues from the book and objects, but every step we took seemed to make the room change around us. Doors appearing and vanishing, walls pulsing like flesh, shadows crawling just out of reach. At some point, I realized the book had started rewriting itself. New pages appeared with new secrets, some not our own, some terrifyingly unfamiliar. The whispers returned, louder, clearer. Voices overlapping, pleading, cursing, laughing. The phrase, "the watcher knows," echoed endlessly, driving us toward madness. We tried calling for help on our phones, but the signal was dead. There was no exit, no rescue, no end. Only the shifting room, the changing clues, and the feeling that something was waiting, watching, somewhere just beyond the walls, waiting for us to make the wrong choice. That night, huddled together around the shifting book and flickering shadows, I realized the terrible truth. We weren't just players in a game. We were the game itself, and the only way out was to lose. Story 3. I'd been looking for a new laptop for weeks, scouring local sales, online marketplaces, even pawn shops, but I kept running into the same problem. Either the prices were insane or the machines were beat-up relics that barely worked. So when I saw the listing for a used laptop on a second-hand site, the price was suspiciously low, but the specs seemed decent. I impulsively messaged the seller and within days had it shipped to my apartment. The package arrived on a rainy evening. The box was battered, the tape crudely slapped on, but the laptop itself looked almost brand new. Sleek, black, with a faint logo on the lid that was partially scratched off. Powered on with a deep hum, and everything seemed fine at first. I booted it up, and the desktop greeted me with a wallpaper of a dark, misty forest. I figured it was the previous owner's aesthetic. Digging into the files, I found tons of folders, photos, documents, random video files, but what caught my eye was a folder on the desktop, named in all caps and with an underscore, Donanasarwatch. The folder was locked, but when I tried the password, or 1234, the usual suspects, the folder popped open anyway. Inside, there were only 3 video files, all with timestamps from a few months ago. I was curious but hesitant. Something about the folder name set off alarms in my head, but my curiosity got the better of me. I clicked on the first video, which began with static, then shifted to a shaky handheld camera angle inside a dimly lit room, barely recognizable, cluttered, with a flickering lamp casting long shadows. The camera panned slowly, revealing an old CRT TV in the corner, its screen glowing softly with a blue static haze. Then the camera focused on a man sitting in a chair in front of the TV, his face obscured by shadows. The audio was faint but unnerving, a low humming and what sounded like whispers. Suddenly, the man raised his head, and the camera caught the faintest glimpse of his eyes. Blank, milky white, unblinking. My heart skipped a beat. The video ended abruptly after a few minutes of this slow, surreal footage. The second video was even stranger. A A series of quick cuts between distorted faces, flashing images of forests, old houses, and cryptic symbols scratched into wood and walls. Each clip was shorter than the last, speeding up until the entire video was a chaotic blur of static and noise. I felt a growing pit in my stomach as I watched it, a nausea that made me want to look away, but I couldn't. The last video was different. It was just a static screen at first, but after a few seconds, the screen flickered and a face appeared. It wasn't human exactly. Elongated, pale, with dark holes where its eyes should be, and a mouth too wide, stretching almost unnaturally. It stared directly at the camera for what felt like an eternity. Then the video cut out. I closed the laptop immediately, hands shaking. I told myself it was probably just a sick joke left behind by the last owner, some creepy prank or art project. But then, that night, I started hearing things. Faint whispers from my room, static in my ears, my laptop screen flickering to life on its own, displaying that same dark forest wallpaper. The next morning, the folder was gone, completely vanished. My blood ran cold. I didn't open the laptop again for days. But then strange things started happening around my apartment. Objects moved, lights flickered, shadows shifted in the corners of my vision. And the laptop, it was never really off. It would wake itself at night, open that folder again, or try to. And I knew whatever was on that laptop wasn't just data. It was watching me, waiting, and I was its next target. The days after I first discovered the folder, Search became a blur of growing paranoia and creeping dread, the kind that settles into your bones and refuses to let go. At first, I tried to rationalize everything away. Maybe it was just a glitch, a coincidence, my imagination playing tricks after watching those disturbing videos. But then the symptoms escalated. The laptop seemed alive in a way I couldn't explain. I'd come home after work and find it open on my desk, the screen glowing faintly in the dark. No programs running except the frozen desktop wallpaper. The same misty forest that felt like it was closing in every time I looked at it. Sometimes it was like the machine was breathing, soft pulses of light from the keyboard, a quiet hum that wasn't there before. One night, I woke up to the glow from the laptop screen lighting up the corner of my bedroom. I hadn't turned it on, hadn't even been near it since falling asleep. When I walked over, the Dont_watch folder was back on the desktop. I froze. My fingers trembled as I moved the mouse, and the cursor hovered over the folder. Part of me screamed to close the laptop, to throw it away, to burn it. But I clicked. Inside, there were more videos. Not just 3 anymore, but dozens, hundreds, each time-stamped later than the last, stretching into the future. Some were short clips. A shadow moving across a hallway, a whisper in the dark, static filling the screen before flickering to reveal a pale figure standing just outside the edge of the frame, head tilted unnaturally, watching. Others were longer, more intense, footage of the room I was living in, but filmed from impossible angles, cameras placed inside walls, in vents, under furniture. There were videos of me, sleeping, sitting at my desk, even moments when I thought I was alone, but the camera showed a shadow lurking just out of sight, like a constant, silent observer. The thing that horrified me most was that some videos showed me reacting to the laptop's presence. Looking over my shoulder, trembling hands hovering over the keyboard, whispering my own name in panic, but I never remembered the moments, like they were erased from my memory. I felt like I was losing control of my own life, a marionette to whatever force had taken root in this cursed machine. The more I watched, the more the line between reality and the videos blurred. My dreams turned into nightmares of endless forests where the pale figure from the last video lurked, its eyes hollow but filled with terrible intent. I'd wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, to find the laptop open again, the folder blinking on the screen like a heartbeat. The room grew colder, the shadows thicker, and the whispers louder. At one point, I caught myself talking to the laptop, pleading for it to stop, to leave me alone. Nothing responded, but the screen flickered, and the folder name changed to all caps, flashing urgently, "Watch ME." Against every instinct, I opened a video labeled, "Watch ME." The footage was a live feed of my apartment, but distorted, warped like a funhouse mirror. The pale figure appeared again, standing behind me in the video, its head slowly turning toward the camera, mouth stretching impossibly wide into a grin. I spun around in my room, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Just the dark, still room and the cold air that pressed against my skin. The next morning, I found scratches on my bedroom wall, long, deep gouges that hadn't been there before. I hadn't made them, no one else had been in my apartment. And worst of all, I was beginning to change. I felt hollowed out, like a part of me was leaking away every time I looked at the laptop. My reflection in the mirror seemed off. My eyes darker, deeper, like empty wells. I started avoiding my friends, avoiding calls, avoiding the world outside. The laptop was the center of everything now. My focus, my obsession, my prison. And the folder don't watch became a twisted mantra. A cruel invitation I couldn't resist, pulling me deeper into the nightmare. Every time I tried to delete the folder, the laptop would crash, reboot, and the folder would return. More persistent, more menacing. Files would rename themselves, icons shift positions, the desktop wallpaper changing from the forest to static, to a close-up of those empty eyes staring right at me. I began documenting what happened, writing down timestamps, recording the screen with my phone, trying to piece together what this thing was. But every record I made disappeared the next day. Like my efforts to resist were erased, rewritten by the laptop itself. And then one evening, after hours of watching the videos and typing frantically into a note file, the screen went black. The keyboard backlight died. The laptop was silent. I sighed, exhausted, and closed it, telling myself it was over for now. But as I stood up, the room temperature dropped. I heard breathing low, rasping, right behind me. I spun around. Nothing. The laptop screen suddenly lit up again. This time, it displayed a single video. Live footage of my own face, wide-eyed, terrified. And in the reflection behind me, just barely visible in the corner of the frame, stood that pale figure, smiling, waiting. From the moment I saw that live video feed of myself with the pale figure lurking behind, something inside me shattered like a glass dropped onto concrete. It wasn't just the image on the screen. It was the crushing, suffocating certainty that this thing knew everything about me, that it had been watching far longer than I'd ever imagined. I felt my skin crawl, goosebumps racing down my arms as cold dread pooled deep in my gut. The room around me, my supposed sanctuary, felt transformed into a trap, one lined with shadows too thick to penetrate and eyes that refused to blink. For days after that, I couldn't bring myself to touch the laptop. I put it in a box, locked it in a closet, even tried to bury it under clothes and papers, but every time I looked away, when my back was turned, the screen flickered to life in the dark, and that same folder, don't blinked back at me with cruel insistence. The more I resisted, the more persistent it became. One night, I awoke to the sound of static hissing from the closet. Heart hammering, I pulled open the door. The laptop was glowing, open on the floor with the folder wide open. New files appeared. Not just videos, but strange audio files filled with whispered voices speaking in languages I didn't understand. Ancient incantations that seemed to crawl into my mind and twist my thoughts. The laptop had become a gateway, a doorway to something beyond my world. The boundaries between reality and nightmare blurred. I began seeing glimpses out of the corner of my eye. Pale figures standing silently just beyond my vision. Black voids where shadows should have been. At times, I caught the faintest breath on my neck when I was alone in the dark. A cold hand brushing against my skin but vanishing before I could turn. I stopped sleeping. When I did, the nightmares consumed me. Endless forests with trees that whispered secrets. Mirrors that showed not my reflection but that twisted face. The pale figure with the too wide grin and hollow eyes. I tried everything to break free. Reinstalling the operating system, wiping the hard drive, even smashing the laptop with a hammer. But the machine was unbreakable. Every time I powered it on, the same cursed folder returned. And the videos, they multiplied. There were now hundreds, thousands, each showing scenes that I swear hadn't happened yet. Footage of me wandering my own apartment, talking to thin air, sometimes crawling on the floor like an animal. Worse, the camera caught things I couldn't explain. Dark figures moving just beyond the frame, shapes dissolving into the walls, faint, impossible symbols that glowed faintly on the surfaces. It was like the laptop was rewriting my life, rewriting reality itself. My friends tried to help, but every time I showed them the laptop, the screen would go black or fill with static. The room would grow icy cold, and they'd leave shaken, convinced I was losing my mind. And then came the calls. Not phone calls, but a ringing that started in my head, persistent, insistent, a low buzzing that never stopped. When I answered, there was nothing but that same static and whispers repeating one phrase over and over, "Watch." The pressure became unbearable. I realized the laptop wasn't just watching me. It was waiting for me to watch back, to look deep into its darkness and surrender. One night, unable to resist any longer, I opened the folder again. The screen glowed brighter than ever, and the laptop seemed to pulse in my hands, like it was alive, breathing. The videos played themselves in a frenzy, flashes of past owners, all twisted and broken, their faces pale and eyes hollow, screaming silently. I saw places I'd never been, rooms filled with broken mirrors, endless corridors lined with flickering candles, faces pressing against glass, begging for release. Then the screen went black, and a single file appeared. "Your turn." I hesitated, then clicked. The video was live, not of me, but from inside the laptop itself. The camera panned through a digital void, twisted corridors made of code and shadows, until it settled on a figure in the distance. The pale man. He looked directly into the camera and smiled that impossible grin. Then he vanished and the screen went dark. In that silence, I heard it again, the breathing behind me. I spun around. Nothing but the room. But my laptop hummed louder than ever. And I knew it was waiting for me to watch, to surrender, to become the next owner of its secrets. The following days were a waking nightmare that shredded what was left of my sanity. I couldn't escape the laptop's grip. It was as if the machine had become a parasite feeding on my fears and memories, growing stronger with every glance I forced upon it. I tried to destroy it again, this time smashing the screen until shards of glass littered my floor and sparks flew from the exposed circuits. But when I booted up another device and logged into my accounts, I found messages from the laptop. Not emails, not texts, but eerie videos uploaded to my own cloud storage. Files I hadn't created, messages from a place that didn't exist outside of that cursed machine. They were short clips of darkness interrupted by flashes of that pale figure's face, whispering words I couldn't understand, but whose meaning sank deep into my bones like poison. Sometimes the videos showed my own apartment, empty but for shadows that shifted unnaturally, crawling along the walls as if alive. I began locking my doors, turning off all lights, pulling curtains tight, but nothing mattered. The moment I closed my eyes, the darkness that lived in the laptop crept into my mind, dragging me into dreams where I was trapped in endless voids, chased by that grinning figure, its cold hands reaching for me through the static. During the day, I noticed changes in myself. My reflection in mirrors grew distorted. My eyes, once bright and alert, became dull, glassy, like the pale man's. My voice would sometimes falter or crack, and I'd find myself repeating words I hadn't spoken, thoughts I hadn't had. My sense of time blurred. Days bled into nights, and I lost track of how long I'd been trapped in this living nightmare. One morning, I woke up on the floor, the laptop open beside me. On the screen was a live feed of my bedroom, but not as it was now. It was warped, twisted, walls dripping like melted wax, the ceiling bleeding shadows, and in the corner, the pale figure, smiling wider than any human mouth could, watching me sleep. I screamed, but the figure didn't react. It simply faded away, leaving behind a cold silence. I knew then that I wasn't alone anymore. This thing had crossed the boundary between the digital and the physical, and it was here in my world, waiting for me to give in. Desperation drove me to research the laptop's origins. The seller was a ghost, no verifiable identity, no trace beyond that single listing. The model itself was strange, an older make with customized hardware and software no manufacturer recognized. The last owner? No records, no history, just rumors I stumbled upon in deep internet forums about a man who vanished after claiming he discovered a window to another realm on his laptop. The stories were fragmented, whispered, but all ended the same way. The man was found dead, eyes wide open, mouth twisted in a silent scream. As I sat alone, laptop humming softly in the dark, the folder appeared again, bigger than ever. Watch! It was no longer an option. It was a command. My fingers hovered, heart pounding like a drum in my chest. Then I clicked. The screen exploded into a torrent of images. Memories, nightmares, lives I'd never lived but somehow remembered, places I'd never been but knew intimately. Faces stared back at me from the void. Some human, some monstrous, all broken. The pale man appeared again, closer this time, reaching out through the screen as if to pull me inside. I felt a coldness seep into my bones, and my vision blurred. I wanted to look away, to shut it all down, but my body betrayed me. My eyes locked onto the screen, unable to look away, trapped in that horrifying gaze. And then, as the figure's grin stretched impossibly wide, the room around me began to dissolve into static, the boundary between me and the screen breaking apart. I was no longer just watching. I was becoming part of it. I don't remember exactly how long I stayed trapped in that nightmarish trance, locked in the gaze of that grotesque, unblinking figure whose smile stretched impossibly wide across the screen. Time fractured and folded in on itself, minutes bleeding into hours, or was it days? My body sat unmoving, my eyes glued to the laptop as static cascaded across the display like a sickening waterfall of noise and shadows. But somewhere deep inside, beyond the haze of terror and confusion, I felt a tiny spark of resistance, a desperate will to escape this living nightmare that had become my life. Slowly, painfully, I tore my gaze away, and the room snapped back into focus. The familiar shadows of my apartment, the faint hum of the laptop now eerily silent. But I knew, somehow, that I had crossed a threshold. The pale figure was no longer confined to the screen. It had followed me out, settled in the corners of my vision, lurking in reflections, whispering in the silence between thoughts. That night, sleep fled from me altogether. Instead, I sat in the dark, clutching the laptop as if it were a lifeline and a noose both at once. My fingers trembled as I scoured every corner of the system for a way out. A virus, a hidden key, anything that could sever the connection. And then I found it. A hidden partition buried deep in the hard drive, encrypted with a code far too complex for me to crack on my own. Desperate, I reached out to online forums, posting anonymously about my ordeal, hoping anyone had seen this before. That's when a message arrived in my inbox. It was from an unknown sender. The subject line just one word: run. The message contained a link to a torrent, an archive of files labeled "The Legacy of the Last Owner." My hands shook as I downloaded the files, fearing what I might find. Inside was a diary, cryptic notes, and video footage from the last owner's perspective. The entries detailed his descent into madness after acquiring the laptop, how the Don't_Watch folder appeared mysteriously, how the videos revealed not just images but glimpses into another realm, a digital purgatory where the pale figure ruled. His last entry was a warning, scrawled in frantic handwriting. It watches, it learns, it feeds. Destroy the device or be consumed. The videos were worse, hours of footage showing the man's slow unraveling, conversations with unseen entities, the pale figure emerging from screens, whispering promises of knowledge and damnation. The final clip ended with the man staring directly at the camera, eyes hollow, mouth twisted into a silent scream, before the screen cut to black. Armed with this knowledge, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't keep running or hiding. The laptop was a parasite, and the only way to survive was to fight back. I gathered tools, software to wipe drives, magnets to fry hardware, even explosives if it came to that. But every time I tried to disconnect or destroy the laptop, it fought back. The screen would flare to life with that grinning face. The room would grow icy, and shadows would slither across the walls, whispering threats and secrets. My mind fractured under the pressure, the lines between reality and the digital hell bleeding away. Friends and family stopped calling. I stopped answering. I became a ghost in my own life, haunted by a machine that refused to die and the pale figure that haunted my every waking moment. And then, one night, as lightning cracked across the sky and the world outside trembled, the laptop finally revealed its true purpose. The screen glowed with an unnatural light, casting long shadows that twisted into shapes I could no longer deny. The Watch folder expanded into a doorway, a portal shimmering with static and darkness. The pale figure stepped through the screen, its eyes boring into mine, its smile wider than any nightmare. It whispered in a voice like rusted metal scraping bone, "Your turn." I understood then. The laptop wasn't just cursed. It was a vessel, a trap, a gateway for something ancient and hungry. And now it had chosen me as its next host. I had to make a choice. Surrender and become part of the endless digital purgatory, or fight and risk losing everything. My mind, my soul, my reality. I slammed the laptop shut and ran into the night, the device tucked under my arm like a cursed relic. I don't know what's waiting for me in the dark, or how long I have before it comes for me again. But I'm writing this now because I have to warn you. If you ever come across a used laptop with a folder named Watch, don't open it. Don't watch, because some things aren't meant to be seen. And once you look, there's no turning back. Story 4. I still don't know how to start this without sounding insane. But here goes. It all began about 6 weeks ago when my friend Lucas disappeared. We were part of a small group of friends who had known each other since high school, and we always stayed connected on this group chat. Just the usual banter, memes, plans, stupid jokes. But one day, Lucas just stopped showing up in person. No calls, no texts, no social media activity. Except in the group chat. Somehow, he was still active there. It started out subtle, just a "hey guys," or a random emoji late at night. At first, we thought maybe he was just really busy or traveling, but then things got weird. The messages would come at all hours, even when we all knew he should have been asleep or at work. One night, I tried calling him and his phone rang once, then went straight to voicemail. Days passed, and the group chat was the only place he appeared. When I finally pushed the others, asking if they'd heard from him offline, they all shrugged, uneasy. Then the messages started getting strange. They weren't just random greetings anymore. They were cryptic, like he was sending us clues or warnings. One message said simply, "They're watching." Another said, "I can't get out." The group chat became this eerie place where his words felt desperate but impossible to verify. I even shared his last known location with the others, but no one had seen or heard from him in person. It was like he vanished, yet his digital ghost lingered, typing away like nothing had happened. I started obsessing over this, watching the timestamps on his messages, trying to catch any clue about what was going on. But every time I tried to bring it up, the conversation would veer off or others would change the subject. I realized something was seriously wrong, and that's when the nightmares started. I dreamt of Lucas trapped somewhere dark, trying to reach us, screaming silently while shadows closed in around him. The next morning, there was a message from him in the chat that just said, "Help me." That was the moment I decided I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was wrong, and my friend was in trouble. But no one else seemed to believe me. They just said it was probably some sick prank or glitch. But the way his messages changed, they were getting darker, more erratic, sometimes typed in all caps, sometimes with strange symbols mixed in. Then there was that one message that stopped me cold. It was a photo he sent, an image of a room with peeling wallpaper and a single window barred shut. I recognized it immediately. It was from the abandoned house on the edge of town, the one we used to dare each other to explore when we were kids. That house had a terrible reputation, but I never thought Lucas would be there. Especially now. The problem was, no one had been inside that house for years. So how did he get that photo? And who was he talking to in that dark, forgotten place? I knew I had to find out, but what I found only made things worse. I'm going to tell you everything I discovered, from the first strange message to the last chilling text. And if you ever get a message from someone who's supposed to be missing, be careful, because sometimes the person on the other end isn't really there. The night I saw that photo, my heart pounded like a drum in my chest. I stared at the image on my phone for what felt like hours, tracing every detail. The cracked plaster, the grimy floorboards, and that single barred window with a faint glow behind it. I messaged Lucas right away, asking if he was really in that house, but the reply came almost instantly. "They won't let me leave." The words felt heavy, like a weight pressing down on my soul. I showed the photo to the others, hoping it would shake them out of their disbelief. But instead, the group chat went quiet for a long time, until one of them typed, "This isn't funny anymore." No one else had seen or heard from Lucas outside the chat, and that scared me more than anything. I decided to visit the old house myself, to see if there was any clue left behind. The building loomed at the edge of town like a forgotten nightmare, its windows boarded up, doors sealed shut, vines creeping over every surface. It was exactly how I remembered it from childhood. Creepy, cold, silent. I circled the property, looking for a way in, but the front entrance was padlocked, and the boards on the windows were nailed tight. That's when I noticed it. A small piece of wood on the back window was slightly loose. I pried it open just enough to squeeze my phone's camera inside, snapping a photo. The inside was dark, filled with dust motes floating in stale air. But then I saw it, a faint shape at the far end of the room. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but as I adjusted the camera, the shape became clearer. Someone sitting on the floor, head bowed, hands tied. The figure was too far to make out clearly, but my blood ran cold. I sent the photo back to the group chat with trembling fingers and typed, "Is that Lucas?" The response came almost immediately. An emoji of a skull, then a message, "Help me." I showed the picture to my closest friend in the group, Mia, and she looked as terrified as I felt. She begged me not to go back there alone, but I couldn't leave Lucas trapped in that place, wherever that was. I started researching the house's history and found out it had been empty for decades, a place where terrible things were rumored to happen. People spoke of disappearances, strange noises, and shadows moving behind the boarded windows at night. Some even whispered about a cult that used the house as a meeting place years ago, practicing rituals no one wanted to speak about. That explained the bars on the window in the photo Lucas sent. They weren't just old, they were meant to keep someone inside. I tried to convince the others to come with me, but fear had silenced the group chat. Slowly, I felt more isolated, as if Lucas's disappearance was pulling us all apart. The messages kept coming, sometimes pleading, sometimes cryptic, like, "Don't trust the eyes that watch," or "They wear my face." One message haunted me in particular, sent at 3:33 a.m. "I'm not who you think I am." That line sent me spiraling. What did it mean? Had Lucas been replaced by something else? Or was he hiding a terrible truth? I didn't want to believe it, but the longer I stared at those words, the more I feared the worst. That night, I stayed up, staring at my phone, waiting for the group chat to light up again. When it did, the message wasn't from Lucas. It was from a different account using his name, typing just one word, "Run." After seeing that last message, just the single word "run" from Lucas's account, I felt like the ground shifted beneath me. My fingers froze over the keyboard, unsure whether to respond or to just shut off my phone and pretend none of this was happening. But I couldn't. Something about that message screamed urgency, pure panic. The group chat erupted into chaos as the others began responding frantically, asking what was going on, who was sending these messages. The real horror was that the account sending the messages had the same profile picture, the same username, and was logged in from the same device as Lucas. But Lucas was missing. No one had seen him in days. I started to realize that whoever or whatever was behind the messages wasn't just messing with us. It knew things, it knew us. There was no way for someone on the outside to be this detailed unless they had access to Lucas's phone, his mind, or something worse. The messages escalated. "They're inside the house. I'm trapped between worlds. The mirror shows what isn't there." And then chillingly, "Don't look behind you." I kept looking anyway. I kept feeling like eyes were watching me through the darkness of my room, like something was waiting just beyond my vision. One night, after hours of messages back and forth, the group chat went silent. Everyone except that account disappeared. The messages stopped coming, and no one was replying anymore. It was as if the chat itself had been frozen, like the digital presence of Lucas was still there, but no one else dared to speak. I started noticing odd things happening around me. My phone would light up in the middle of the night with messages from Lucas, but the texts were glitches, broken words, strange symbols, static. And sometimes the phone would turn on by itself, displaying a single phrase on the screen, "Find me." The house was the only place mentioned over and over again, the place where Lucas had been last seen. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still there, caught in some terrible limbo between reality and something else. So I decided to go back, this time bringing Mia with me. We planned it carefully, going at dusk when no one was around. As we neared the house, a cold breeze swept through the trees, and I heard whispers on the wind, too faint to understand but heavy with menace. Inside, the air was thick, stale, and suffocating. Every step echoed off the cracked walls. We found the same barred window from the photo Lucas sent. The bars were old, rusted, but strong. I pressed my hand against the cold metal and whispered his name. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with a new message in the group chat. "I'm here." The text was time-stamped just seconds ago, but Lucas was nowhere to be found. We searched the house, room by room, but all we found was dust, broken furniture, and scrawled messages on the walls written in what looked like dried blood. "He watches. They never leave. Don't trust the face." Then we heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from beneath the floorboards. We pried up the old wooden planks and found a narrow crawl space, dark and cramped. As I shined my flashlight inside, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A pair of eyes staring back at me. They were human, terrified, pleading. I reached in to pull whoever it was out, but the eyes disappeared, and the crawl space was empty. The last message on my phone lit up then, this one from Lucas. "Help me before it's too late." I knew then that whatever had taken him wasn't done, and that the digital messages were just the beginning of a nightmare none of us could escape. After that night in the house, everything spiraled out of control. Mia and I left the place shaken to our cores, but we knew we couldn't just walk away. Not when Lucas was still trapped somewhere, sending us desperate messages through a phone that should have been silent. Back home, I became obsessed with tracking every single activity from Lucas's account. I downloaded chat logs, cross-referenced timestamps, and tried to find patterns. That's when I noticed something chilling. The messages weren't just random. They seemed to respond to events in real time. Whenever someone in our group chat typed, the Lucas account would reply almost instantly, even if the person was on the other side of the world. It was like the account was watching us, listening to our every word. One night, while scrolling through the chat history, I noticed a new message from Lucas's account with no text, just a location tag. I tapped it, and it brought me to a spot deep in the woods behind the abandoned house, an area no one had ever mentioned before. Something about the location sent a wave of dread through me. I showed the map to Mia, and we decided we had no choice but to investigate. The next day, armed with flashlights and a sense of dread, we headed into the forest, following the GPS coordinates as best we could. The woods grew thicker and darker the deeper we went, and the air felt heavier, as if we were walking into a trap. We came across old, rusted signs warning trespassers to keep out. Eventually, we found a clearing where the ground was disturbed, like something had been recently dug up. At the center lay a half-buried metal box, corroded and locked tight. I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. That's when my phone buzzed again. Another message from Lucas's account. This time, it was a single photo. My blood ran cold when I saw what was inside the box. A small, worn journal with pages yellowed by time, filled with handwriting I recognized instantly. It was Lucas's, but the writing wasn't his normal style. It was jagged, frantic, filled with warnings about the Watchers and the door between worlds. As I flipped through the pages, the last entry made my skin crawl. It described how the house wasn't just a building, but a gateway, a place where people who vanished ended up trapped between realities. The journal said that once you crossed the threshold, the house would feed on your fear, twisting your mind until you couldn't tell what was real. Lucas had been trying to find a way out, but the more he searched, the deeper he fell into madness. The final sentence was smeared with what looked like blood. If you find this, don't come looking. They want more. They're coming for me, and soon they'll come for you too. Suddenly, my phone died, the screen going black as if something was draining its life. I looked up and realized Mia was staring at me, eyes wide with terror. The forest around us seemed to close in, shadows stretching and shifting like living things. The air turned icy, and I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. We didn't stay a second longer. We ran back through the woods, the sounds of something chasing us echoing in the distance. Back in my apartment, I locked every door and window and deleted Lucas's account from the group chat, hoping to sever whatever connection had held him. And now us, captive. But the messages never stopped. They started appearing on other devices, on strange numbers, in places where no one could explain them. And every time the words were the same: "I'm still here. They're waiting. Don't let them in." I realized then that Lucas wasn't just missing. He was gone, lost in a nightmare between worlds. And somehow he was still reaching out to us, trapped in the digital void, begging for help that may never come. The days after we found the journal were the darkest I've ever lived through. I tried to convince Mia to come forward with everything we'd uncovered, to get help, maybe contact the police, but even she was terrified of what we'd stumbled into. The thing was, no one wanted to believe us. Lucas was officially missing, and his phone was supposedly inactive, yet here we were, getting messages from his account like some ghost trapped in the wires. The group chat was dead. People had blocked the number, or just stopped responding, but I couldn't turn away. The messages grew worse, more personal. They knew details only Lucas and I shared. One night, my phone buzzed with a message that simply read, "I see you." It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a prank. I could feel it. I started noticing strange things happening in my own home. Doors creaking open by themselves, shadows flickering just out of sight, and that cold feeling that someone was always watching. I installed cameras, set alarms, but nothing ever showed up on tape or trip sensors. It was like whatever was there was invisible but present, lingering just beyond the veil of reality. I tried replying to the messages, begging for Lucas to tell me what was happening, how to help him, but the answers were cryptic. "They don't want me gone. I'm losing myself. Watch your back." I didn't understand what they meant until Mia disappeared. One night, she left a message in the group chat, something I wish I had never read. "I'm sorry. They're here." Then silence. I called her dozens of times. No response. I went to her apartment, but she was gone. No note, no sign of struggle, nothing. The police said she probably left voluntarily, but I knew better. I could feel the same darkness creeping closer to me, the same thing that had taken Lucas and now Mia. The messages from Lucas's account kept coming, sometimes appearing as texts, other times as emails or even direct messages on social media. It was like the presence was spreading, reaching through every form of digital communication to get to me. Then, one night, my phone lit up with a new message from Lucas's account. "They want you next." The text was accompanied by a photo, taken from inside my own bedroom. The camera was positioned to capture the side of my bed and the dark corner where I often felt something lurking. I checked every window and door, but no one had entered. The locks were intact. My heart hammered as I realized I wasn't safe anywhere. I showed the photo to the police, but they dismissed it as a hoax. Friends stopped returning my calls. I was completely alone. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and exhaustion. I barely slept, too afraid to close my eyes. Every time my phone buzzed, I flinched. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, a final message arrived. It was just one word: "Goodbye." After that, the messages stopped. The account disappeared from all platforms, as if it had never existed. But the silence was worse than the noise. I still don't know what happened to Lucas, or Mia, or what exactly they were. All I know is that something sinister lurks in the shadows of the digital world, waiting to trap you if you're not careful. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I swear I can hear the faint ping of a message arriving on my phone. But when I check, there's nothing there. I keep hoping this nightmare is over. But deep down, I'm terrified it's only just beginning. I've spent every day since trying to piece together what happened, to find some kind of closure or explanation, but there's nothing. Lucas and Mia vanished without a trace, and their digital footprints disappeared like ghosts in the system. I've blocked every number, changed every password, and even considered abandoning technology altogether, but the memories and the fear cling to me like a shadow I can't shake. Sometimes, when I'm alone and the world is silent, my phone buzzes softly with a notification, but when I check, there's nothing there, just empty silence. I'm convinced now that whatever trapped Lucas in that house wasn't just some physical place. It was something beyond our understanding, something that used the digital world to reach out and pull people in. That group chat, once a place of laughter and friendship, became a gateway, a trap woven through messages and screens. And I fear it's still out there, waiting. I want to warn anyone who's listening. If a friend goes missing, and their messages keep coming from nowhere, don't respond. Don't try to follow the clues, because sometimes what seems like a cry for help is just the beginning of a nightmare that will never end. Lucas is gone. Mia is gone. And I don't know if I'm next. But if you ever get a message from someone who shouldn't be able to reach you, remember this story and don't answer. Because some ghosts aren't meant to be found, and some messages aren't meant to be read. Story 5. I never thought a simple weekend getaway would turn into the worst nightmare of my life. But here I am, writing this to warn anyone who might come across the cabin we rented last summer. It all started when a group of us, 5 friends looking to escape the city, found this old cabin tucked away deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town. The photos online made it look charming and rustic, but when we arrived, something about the place felt off. The air was thick, heavy, like the forest was holding its breath. The owner was oddly evasive about the cabin's history, brushing off our questions with vague answers about past guests loving their stay. We shrugged it off, eager for a quiet weekend. But on the second day, while exploring the creaky wooden floorboards in the living room, my friend Sarah stumbled upon a loose plank. Curious, we pried it open and found a narrow staircase spiraling down into darkness. No one mentioned a basement in the listing, so our hearts pounded as we grabbed flashlights and descended. What we found was chilling. A hidden room carved out beneath the cabin, walls lined with old shelves covered in dust and cobwebs. And there, on a rickety wooden table, lay a stack of leather-bound diaries. They were worn, yellowed with age, each labeled with a name and a date. The last 10 guests who had stayed in the cabin, dating back decades. But the dates all ended with the same thing, the date they died. Our hands trembled as we flipped through the first diary, written in the shaky handwriting of a terrified person who described strange noises, shadows moving just out of sight, and feelings of being watched. Each diary told a darker story. Guests who disappeared without a trace, who wrote of waking up to whispering voices, or finding strange symbols carved into the walls while they slept. The entries became more frantic and incoherent as the pages went on, ending abruptly with bloodstains and desperate pleas for help. None of us wanted to believe what we were reading, but the horror was undeniable. The last diary was dated just weeks before our arrival, written by a couple who vanished the night before we got there. As we sat there, the temperature in the room dropped suddenly, our breaths visible in the cold air. And then we heard it, the faintest whisper, like a voice calling from the shadows. We ran back upstairs, locking the hidden door behind us, but the feeling followed us. Over the next days, strange things began to happen. Footsteps in empty rooms, doors slamming shut, fleeting glimpses of figures standing just beyond the trees. We wanted to leave, but the forest seemed to close around us, as if the cabin itself didn't want us to go. I'm writing this now because I managed to escape, but not without scars, both seen and unseen. If you ever find yourself near that cabin, don't go inside. Don't look for hidden rooms or diaries, because some places remember, and some stories should never be uncovered. The discovery of that hidden room changed everything, and none of us could shake the feeling that the cabin was alive, watching, waiting. After finding the diaries, we spent a sleepless night huddled in the main room, whispering over the frightening tales written by the last 10 guests who had vanished there. Each diary was like a window into their final days, full of dread and madness. One guest described waking to the sound of nails scraping against the walls at 3 a.m., and when he tried to leave, he found the forest surrounding the cabin had turned into a labyrinth with no exit. Another diary spoke of a creeping shadow that moved beneath the floorboards, sometimes whispering promises of safety, but always ending in terror. The handwriting in later pages grew erratic, as if the author was losing grip on reality, begging for mercy that never came. We realized the cabin wasn't just haunted, it was a trap, feeding on those who stayed inside. Over the next few days, the paranoia consumed us. Our phones lost signal, so we couldn't call for help. The woods outside seemed denser, darker, twisting around the cabin like a cage. Every time someone tried to leave, they'd find themselves inexplicably back on the cabin porch, as if the forest refused to let them escape. Nightfall was the worst. We heard whispers just outside the windows, too low to make out words, but chilling enough to freeze our blood. Shadows darted at the edge of the tree line, watching us with cold, unblinking eyes. Sleep was impossible, and when someone finally dozed off, they'd wake screaming from nightmares of being buried alive or chased by unseen creatures through the woods. I remember one night when Mark, one of our friends, disappeared. We were all together in the living room, and suddenly he was just gone, no sound, no warning. At first, we thought he'd slipped out to find help, but then we found his diary in that hidden room, pages freshly torn from a notebook we didn't recognize. In it, he wrote frantic entries describing voices calling his name, a figure with glowing eyes standing in the trees, and the terrifying sensation of being pulled into the darkness. The final entry was a single sentence written in trembling letters: "They won't let me go." Mark was never found. That was the moment panic set in fully. We barricaded ourselves inside, but the cabin fought back. Windows rattled with invisible force, doors slammed shut as if slammed by unseen hands. The air grew thick with a foul, metallic smell that made us gag. We tried to burn the diaries, hoping to break whatever curse held us, but the flames wouldn't catch. The pages burned black but never turned to ash. It was as if the cabin itself was swallowing the evidence, keeping the horror alive for the next victims. We took turns watching the woods, armed with whatever we could find, but it was useless. The forest whispered promises of safety, but none of us believed it anymore. When it was my turn, I saw them, figures standing just beyond the tree-line, their faces blurred and shifting, eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. They didn't move toward me, but the weight of their gaze crushed my spirit. That's when I understood the cabin was a gateway to something else, something hungry and ancient. The last 10 guests weren't victims of accidents or misfortune. They were sacrifices, caught in a nightmare that fed on fear and despair. When I finally escaped, crawling through the woods as the sun rose, I thought I'd left it all behind. But even now, the memories haunt me. The sound of scratching beneath the floor, the cold breath on my neck when no one was there, and worst of all, the feeling that somewhere, deep beneath that cabin, the hidden room waits for the next unlucky souls to find it. The moment I escaped the cabin's grasp, I thought my nightmare was over, but I was wrong. The forest seemed to swallow me whole as I stumbled blindly through the thick underbrush, branches clawing at my face, roots tripping me again and again. Hours passed, or maybe it was days. Time lost meaning out there, but finally, I burst onto a dirt road leading away from the cursed place. Exhausted and battered, I flagged down a passing car, and the driver took me to the nearest town. At first, I wanted to tell everyone about the horrors we'd uncovered. The hidden room, the diaries, the way the cabin trapped us like prey. But when I tried, the words caught in my throat. People looked at me like I was insane, or worse, like they were afraid to listen. The police said there was no record of the cabin or any missing guests in that area, and the local residents avoided talking about the woods, their eyes flickering with fear whenever I mentioned the cabin. Determined to understand what I'd witnessed, I started digging into public records and local legends. That's when I discovered something chilling. The land the cabin stood on had a history stretching back centuries, a place of strange disappearances and whispered curses. The stories spoke of a group of settlers who vanished without a trace, and later, travelers who came looking for them only to disappear themselves. Locals believed the forest was cursed, a gateway between worlds where time and reality warped and twisted. I even found old newspaper clippings about a man who claimed to have lived in a cabin in those woods and spoke of voices in the walls and shadows that moved like living things. The article ended with the man disappearing under mysterious circumstances. I started to question my own sanity, haunted by dreams of the cabin's hidden room, the eerie diaries, and the last words scrawled in trembling ink by those trapped inside. My nights were tormented by whispers echoing from dark corners, shadows creeping along my walls, and the sickening smell of decay that would sometimes fill my apartment. Friends stopped calling me back, and my phone would randomly turn on by itself, displaying a flickering image of the cabin's basement staircase. The worst was when I received a package. No return address, just an old, leather-bound diary identical to those we found beneath the cabin. Inside, the pages were blank except for a single sentence written in red ink. "You can't leave. Not yet." It was then that I realized the cabin's grip wasn't limited to its physical location. The curse had followed me, crossing the boundaries between the forest and the outside world. The hidden room wasn't just a place beneath the cabin. It was a gateway, a prison for souls caught between dimensions, feeding on fear and trapping anyone who dared to uncover its secrets. I'm sharing this story now because I don't know how much time I have left before the cabin claims me too. If you ever find yourself near an old cabin in the woods, and you hear whispers calling from beneath the floorboards, don't listen. Don't search for hidden rooms or lost diaries, because some secrets are better left buried, and some rooms are meant to stay locked forever. After that terrifying package arrived, my world spiraled into chaos. I stopped leaving my apartment except when absolutely necessary, every creak and shadow setting my nerves on edge. The diary sat on my desk, its leather cover cold and heavy, as if it weighed more than just paper. I forced myself to open it day after day, hoping for answers, but all I found were blank pages, except the chilling sentence, "You can't leave. Not yet." One night, unable to take the silence, I whispered aloud, "What do you want from me?" The room chilled instantly, and I heard the faintest scraping sound coming from beneath my floorboards. Heart racing, I grabbed a flashlight and got down on my hands and knees, prying at a loose floorboard I'd never noticed before. Beneath it was a small trapdoor, coated in dust and old scratches like it hadn't been opened in decades. Against every instinct screaming at me to stay away, I lifted it, revealing a narrow crawl space descending into darkness. I debated whether to call someone, but who would believe me? Instead, I crawled in, flashlight shaking in my hand. The space stretched out further than it should have, impossibly long and winding like a tunnel leading beneath the city itself. As I went deeper, the air grew colder, thick with a metallic scent that made me gag. Suddenly, the walls around me seemed to pulse, throbbing like a heartbeat. The tunnel opened into a cavernous chamber, walls lined with countless diaries, some identical to the ones we found beneath the cabin, others older, yellowed and brittle, dating back centuries. I recognized some of the names from the town's historical records, people who had vanished mysteriously, their disappearances attributed to accidents or madness. But here, their stories lived on, preserved in these pages of terror and despair. As I flipped through the diaries, I realized the cabin's hidden room was not unique. It was part of an ancient, horrifying network of traps scattered across the land, designed to imprison souls and feed on their fear. A low whisper echoed through the chamber, faint voices speaking in a language I didn't understand, but the meaning was clear. This place was alive, a predator lurking beneath the surface of reality. Panic surged through me as the tunnel began to shake, dust falling from the ceiling. I tried to retrace my path, but the passageways twisted impossibly, turning me around until I was lost. Frantic, I screamed for help, but my voice was swallowed by darkness. Then, just as hopelessness threatened to consume me, a light appeared far ahead, a small glowing orb that pulsed like a heartbeat. Desperation gave me the strength to crawl toward it, and as I reached out, I felt cold hands grab my wrist, pulling me back. I fought with every ounce of strength, breaking free and scrambling toward the light until I burst back through the trapdoor into my apartment, gasping for breath and shaking uncontrollably. I slammed the trapdoor shut and nailed the floorboards down, but I know it's still there, waiting. The diaries, the hidden rooms, the endless corridors beneath the cabin and beyond. They're all connected in a web of terror I barely understand. And now I'm part of it. I don't know how much longer I can fight or hide. The last words I found in one of the diaries haunt me every moment. Once you enter, you become the story. There is no end, only the next chapter. If you find yourself near that cabin, or feel the pull of the woods, run. Don't look for hidden rooms or lost diaries, because some places remember you, and some stories will trap you forever. The days that followed my descent into that hidden underworld beneath my apartment were a blur of exhaustion and terror. Sleep became a distant memory. Every shadow seemed to flicker with movement. Every creak in the floor was a whisper of something waiting just beneath. I started seeing things, brief glimpses of figures standing at the edge of my vision, disappearing whenever I turned to look. The diary never left my side, its presence a constant, oppressive weight. Each time I touched it, a wave of cold rushed through me, as if the pages themselves were alive and breathing. Desperation pushed me to reach out for help once more. I contacted some friends I still trusted, showed them the diary, and told them everything. But their faces betrayed a deep unease. Some refused to believe me outright. Others begged me to stop, warning that speaking about it might make things worse. I realized then how isolated I had become, trapped between the world I knew and the dark labyrinth of secrets below. One night, as I sat reading another diary, the faded script of a woman who vanished a century ago, I noticed the words changing before my eyes. The ink darkened, swirling like smoke, forming new sentences that chilled me to the bone. "You are next." My phone buzzed simultaneously, a new message on an unknown number simply stating, "The story isn't over." Panic gripped me. I wanted to destroy the diary, but every attempt was met with failure. The pages wouldn't burn. The leather cover resisted even the sharpest blades. It was as if the book was bound to me, part of my very soul now. I started researching occult symbols, local legends, anything that might break the curse. I discovered whispered tales of a malevolent force tied to the land, an ancient entity feeding on human fear and despair, using these hidden rooms as its prisons. The diaries were its trophies, traps to ensnare souls and record their suffering. One evening, I found a passage in an old book describing a ritual, a dangerous, last resort method to sever the connection and free the trapped souls. The ritual required confronting the source of the curse at the cabin itself and offering something precious in exchange. The problem was, the cabin had vanished from all maps and records, as if it only existed when it wanted to be found. Fueled by a mixture of dread and hope, I resolved to return, to face whatever waited there and end this nightmare. I packed the diary, some supplies, and prepared for a journey I feared might be my last. As I traveled, the air grew heavier, the forest thicker and more oppressive with every step closer to the cabin's location. The trees seemed to whisper warnings, their branches scratching like fingernails across the sky. When I finally reached the clearing, the cabin stood silent and foreboding, shadows pooling in the windows like dark eyes watching me approach. The front door creaked open before I could touch it, inviting me inside. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of rot and something metallic. The hidden room beneath awaited, the stairs descending like a maw ready to swallow me whole. The diaries from before were there, arranged in a circle around a strange symbol etched into the floor. In the center, a pulsating darkness that seemed to breathe and watch. I knew what I had to do. Holding the diary tightly, I began the ritual, speaking words I barely understood but felt in my bones. The darkness writhed, voices screamed, and shadows lunged at me, but I stood firm. When the final word left my lips, a silence fell so complete it shattered my mind. Then, light flooded the room, burning away the shadows and the curses they carried. The diaries turned to ash in my hands, and the cabin itself seemed to sigh, a release of centuries of pain. I ran from the cabin as dawn broke, feeling lighter but forever changed. I still hear whispers sometimes, reminders that some stories never truly end. But I'm free for now. If you ever come across a cabin deep in the woods, a place with hidden rooms and forgotten diaries, don't stay. Don't read the stories, because some doors once opened are impossible to close, and some shadows follow you home. Even after what I thought was the ritual's final release, the nightmare never truly ended. I returned to my life with a fragile sense of peace, though the scars, both mental and physical, were deep. But slowly, the world around me began to warp, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Faces in the crowd would flicker like distorted reflections. Shadows stretched longer than they should, bending and twisting in impossible ways. The diary had burned to ash, but its curse seemed to have embedded itself in my very being. One night, I woke up to find strange symbols etched into my bedroom walls, sharp, angular marks that glowed faintly in the moonlight. I'd never seen them before, yet they burned into my memory with an unnatural clarity. The air around me thickened, heavy with the metallic scent from the cabin's hidden room. My phone vibrated incessantly, but each time I answered, there was only silence. No voice, no sound, just static and an overwhelming sense of dread. Friends who once tried to help began to distance themselves, their faces filled with quiet horror whenever I mentioned the cabin or the diaries. I was alone, trapped in a world that felt less real with each passing day. Desperation drove me to search for answers in every corner of occult lore and folklore, desperate to find a way to sever the lingering bond. I discovered legends of ancient gateways between worlds, places where reality thins and nightmares cross into the waking world. The cabin, the hidden room, the diaries. They were all part of this web, threads in a tapestry of darkness that had ensnared countless souls before me. As the days wore on, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent, echoing through the hollow spaces of my mind. They spoke in voices both familiar and alien, calling me back to the woods, back to the cabin that should no longer exist. One night, I found myself standing at the edge of the forest without knowing how I got there. The trees loomed overhead, their branches twisting into grotesque shapes, blocking out the stars. The path ahead was obscured by fog that seemed to pulse and writhe like a living thing. And in the distance, I saw the faint glow of the cabin's windows, beckoning me home. The pull was irresistible, a siren's call woven into my soul. As I stepped forward, I knew that the cabin's story wasn't finished, and neither was mine. Somewhere deep within those walls lay a secret that refused to die, a darkness waiting patiently for the next chapter to begin. If you find yourself drawn to a place like that, don't hesitate. Run as fast and as far as you can, because some rooms hold more than memories. Some diaries are written in blood and despair, and some cabins don't just disappear, they wait, waiting for you. I wish I could tell you that walking away from that cabin, that hidden room, and the cursed diaries ended everything. But some horrors don't stay buried. Even now, as I write this, I feel the weight of those stories pressing down on me, like an invisible chain tethered to my soul. The cabin vanished from every map, every record, as if it had never existed, but I know better. I've learned that some places are not bound by time or space. They exist on the edge of reality, feeding on fear, trapping souls in endless cycles of terror. The diaries, the whispered voices, the shadows lurking just beyond sight. They are all reminders that once you've touched that darkness, it never truly lets go. I've tried to warn others, shared what I know, but most dismiss it as a horror story or a figment of a troubled mind. Maybe they're right. Maybe it's all in my head. But if you ever find yourself drawn to a cabin in the woods, if you discover a hidden door beneath the floorboards or stumble upon a diary filled with last desperate words, don't read it. Don't enter, because some stories are traps, some rooms are prisons, and some darkness waits patiently, waiting for the next person foolish enough to unlock its secrets. If you're hearing this, if these words have reached you somehow, heed my warning. Run. Don't look back, because once you open the door, you might never be free again. Story 6. I never thought a doorbell camera would become the thing that haunted me every night. But here I am, unable to sleep, staring at the glow of my phone's screen in the middle of the night. It all started a few weeks ago when I decided to install a smart doorbell camera after a series of break-ins in my neighborhood. I figured it was a simple way to keep an eye on things, a little peace of mind. The installation was easy enough, just a few screws and some wiring, and the app was ready to record every time someone approached my front door. First, it was normal. Neighbors dropping off packages, friends stopping by, the occasional stray cat wandering by. But then I noticed something strange. Every night, at exactly 2:11 a.m., the camera would light up, showing a figure standing just outside my front door. No movement, no knocking, just standing there, staring into the camera. The first few nights, I thought it was a glitch or maybe someone messing with me, so I checked the footage closely during the day. But the figure was always there, motionless, silent, with eyes that seemed to bore straight into the camera lens. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe it was a prank. But then the fear set in when I realized the figure never blinked or moved, even as minutes passed. It was like a statue, but there was something so wrong about it. Like the kind of wrong you feel in your gut but can't explain. I showed the footage to a few friends, but most laughed it off or said it was probably a reflection or a shadow. But the figure was too clear, too deliberate. One night, I stayed up and watched the live feed on my phone, heart pounding. At exactly 2:11 a.m., the camera lit up, and there it was, standing right there on my porch, face obscured by a hood, but those eyes glinting in the darkness. I wanted to run outside, to confront whoever it was, but my legs felt frozen. The figure didn't move or react. It just stood there, watching. Then, after exactly 3 minutes, it disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving only silence and an empty porch. Over the next few days, the presence felt heavier. I started noticing things in my house. Objects slightly moved, doors left ajar, the faint scent of something metallic in the air. I couldn't sleep, always checking the doorbell footage, waiting for 2:11 a.m. to come again. And every night, without fail, there was the figure standing silently, watching. One morning, I woke up to find muddy footprints leading from the porch to my front door, but no one was there. My neighbors said they hadn't seen anyone, but I knew better. Someone was out there watching me, waiting. The police told me to stay calm, to install more cameras, to call if anything escalated. But no one could explain the figure that appeared night after night, unmoving, silent, like a ghost trapped in the feed. And the worst part? I started getting messages, anonymous texts with no sender, just a single image every morning. A close-up of those eyes staring through the camera, as if whoever or whatever it was knew I was watching back. I'm sharing this because I don't know what to do anymore. The figure is still out there, every night at 2:11 a.m., and I'm terrified that one day it won't just be standing outside the door. The realization that this presence wasn't just some random person or glitch hit me harder each night. I started obsessively watching the footage, rewinding, zooming in, trying to catch any movement or detail that could explain what I was seeing. But the figure remained impossibly still, always cloaked in darkness, its face hidden beneath a hood that seemed to absorb all light. The eyes were the only thing visible, unnaturally bright, unblinking, and utterly devoid of humanity. It felt less like a person and more like a specter watching me, waiting for something. The days blurred together as I became consumed by fear and paranoia. I stopped answering the doorbell, stopped going outside after dark, and barely left my house. The footprints kept appearing. Muddy, wet, fresh every morning, leading right up to my door but vanishing mysteriously on my porch. I set up additional cameras, lights, and motion sensors, but none of it stopped the figure's nightly visits. It was as if the creature knew every angle, every blind spot, and had a supernatural control over the space. One night, in the middle of the 2:11 a.m. visit, my phone screen went black for a full 10 seconds, then flickered back on with a live feed not from my camera, but a static, grainy image of my bedroom ceiling. My heart raced as I realized someone, or something, was inside my home, watching me. I rushed to check, but the room was empty. No sign of forced entry, no footprints, nothing out of place except for the lingering smell of that same metallic scent that always accompanied the visits. Sleep became impossible. I would lie awake listening for sounds. any hint that the figure had crossed the threshold. Then the text started again. Each morning, a new photo arrived, closer and clearer, sometimes showing the figure's hand resting just inches from my doorbell button, other times revealing a twisted smile that no human face could make, teeth jagged and glistening. The messages weren't just photos, they were threats. One morning, the image was of my front door with a handprint smeared in blood across the frame. I called the police again, desperate for help, but they couldn't do anything without proof of trespassing. The figure always vanished before anyone arrived. Friends urged me to move out, but where could I go that this thing wouldn't find me? Every night at 2:11 a.m., I felt its eyes burning into my soul through the camera, waiting for me to break, to open the door, to invite it in. Then came the noises, scratches on the walls, faint tapping on windows, soft breathing just outside my bedroom door. Once, I found a small, folded note slipped beneath my door, written in shaky handwriting. "I'm closer than you think." I tore it up, but the dread only grew. One night, I recorded the live feed as usual. At exactly 2:11 a.m., the figure appeared, and this time it moved just slightly. It lifted a finger and pressed it to its lips, signaling me to be quiet. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I froze, staring at the screen, heart pounding. Then, a whisper came through my phone's speaker, soft, guttural, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Let me in." That was the moment I realized this was no longer just a watcher. It was an invader, waiting for my weakest moment to cross the threshold. I've since changed the locks, installed alarms, and surrounded my home with cameras, but nothing stops it. Every night, without fail, the figure returns, standing at my door at 2:11 a.m., eyes fixed, silent, and waiting. I'm terrified that one night, I'll fall asleep or make one mistake, and it will finally come inside. As the nights dragged on, the presence at my door became more than just a figure caught on camera. It began to invade every corner of my life. The whispers beneath my bedroom door grew louder, more insistent, like breath hot against my skin, urging me to open up and let whatever waited outside come in. I started seeing shadows flickering in the corners of my eyes, reflections in mirrors that didn't match the room behind me. Friends stopped visiting, their calls unanswered as I sank deeper into isolation. The phone messages grew more disturbing, each one a collage of twisted images. My own face distorted and warped, my home shown from impossible angles, and the figure's eyes staring back at me with a cold, inhuman hunger. I tried to block the number, delete the messages, even change my phone, but the texts kept coming no matter what. It was as if this entity could reach me through every connection, every piece of technology one owned. One particularly bad night, I awoke to a sudden crash downstairs. Heart racing, I grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the front door. The camera app was open on my phone, and live footage showed the figure standing right there. Only this time, its face was fully visible, twisted in a grotesque grin that split its shadowed hood like a wound. I swear it wasn't human. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over sharp bones. The eyes weren't just bright. They glowed faintly red, burning with malevolent intelligence. Then, it reached out a long, clawed hand and tapped the doorbell. The sound echoed through the house, a chilling reminder that it was here, at my doorstep, waiting. But when I opened the door, nothing. No footprints in the wet grass, no sign of anyone. Just the cold night air and a sense that something unseen was lingering, watching me from the darkness. After that night, the feeling of being hunted grew unbearable. I took to sleeping with knives around my bed, locked every door and window, but none of it mattered. The figure always returned at 2:11 a.m., unyielding, patient, like a predator that knows you can never escape. Then came the nightmares, vivid, horrifying dreams where the figure stood at the foot of my bed, its eyes boring into mine as it whispered secrets I couldn't understand, promises of pain and death. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, the metallic scent filling my room. I started keeping a journal, documenting everything, the appearances, the messages, the sounds, to try and make sense of what was happening. In one entry, I wrote, It's not just a ghost or a stalker. It's something else. Something ancient. It's here because it wants me. I don't know why, but I'm scared that soon it won't be satisfied with just watching. One evening, as I scrolled through the old footage, I noticed something I hadn't before. In every video where the figure appeared, there was a faint, shadowy outline behind it, almost like a second presence lurking just beyond the camera's view. It was subtle but unmistakable. Something was standing behind the figure, watching me too. This discovery crushed what little hope I had left. I'm sharing this now because I don't know how much longer I can hold on. The figure is still out there, always there, at my door at exactly 2:11 a.m., and I'm terrified that the day it decides to step inside is coming soon. If you see something like this on your camera, if you hear the whisper to let it in, don't listen, don't answer, because once the door opens, there's no going back. The tension kept building every night, the fear pressing down so heavily I felt like I was suffocating in my own home. I couldn't tell if it was my imagination or the camera playing tricks, but sometimes the figure's shape seemed to shift, stretching unnaturally tall or shrinking into something smaller and almost childlike. It was like the thing outside was toying with me, sending distorted images through the lens to keep me off balance. Then, one morning, I woke up to find the front door unlocked. I was sure I'd locked it before bed, but the bolt was slid open, the lock broken. There were no signs of forced entry, no footprints on the porch, just that lingering metallic smell. Panic surged through me as I realized someone, or something, had been inside my house while I was sleeping. I called the police again, desperate for help, but they insisted there was no evidence, no footprints, nothing unusual. Just me, frantic and alone, their reassurances feeling hollow and useless. That night, as always, the doorbell camera lit up at 2:11 a.m., and the figure appeared on the screen, but this time it did something different. It raised a hand, slowly, deliberately, and pressed the doorbell button again and again, the chime ringing through the empty street like a sinister heartbeat. I listened to the sound, frozen, as the figure stared directly at the camera, unblinking and unmoving except for that repetitive press. Then, out of nowhere, the screen flickered and the feed cut to static. My phone buzzed with a message. This time, no photo, just text, "Open the door." My hands trembled so violently I almost dropped the phone. I didn't respond. Minutes later, a new message came through. "Don't make me come inside." The house seemed to grow colder, shadows creeping along the walls like living things. I pulled every blanket over my head and tried to shut out the sounds, but I could still hear the faint tapping at the door, as if claws were scratching at the wood. I realized then that whatever was out there wasn't just watching. It was waiting for permission to cross the threshold. The doorbell camera, the texts, the sightings at 2:11 a.m. were all part of some sick game designed to wear me down, to break my will. I started researching similar stories online and found others who had reported eerie figures on their cameras at the same exact time. All hooded, silent, eyes glowing in the dark. None of them had found answers, only warnings to run. That's when I understood this was bigger than me. It wasn't a lone stalker or a prankster. It was a presence tied to technology itself, a digital nightmare crossing into reality. Now, I live every day terrified that tonight, at 2:11 a.m., the figure will stop just standing outside and finally step inside. I've barricaded the doors, installed alarms, surrounded the house with lights, but I know none of it matters. It's patient. It waits for the exact moment I let my guard down, and I fear that moment is coming soon. If you see a figure like this on your doorbell camera, don't ignore it. Don't wait for someone to come help. Lock your doors and pray you never hear the doorbell ring at 2:11 in the morning. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was all just paranoia, maybe stress from working too much or the isolation getting to me. But the camera never lied. At 2:11 a.m. sharp, the screen would glow with that terrible presence, unmoving, silent, watching. That night, I decided to confront whatever was outside. I sat in the dark living room with my phone in hand, the camera app open and ready. When the time hit, the screen brightened, and there it was, the figure, just feet from my door, face obscured, eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. I whispered, "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure didn't move or respond. Then, slowly, it lifted one finger and pressed it to its lips, a chilling gesture to be quiet. Suddenly, the room temperature plummeted. My breath became visible in the air, and a suffocating heaviness settled around me. I heard a low, guttural whisper echoing in the room. "Let me in!" My hands trembled violently as a wave of dread crashed over me. I wanted to run, but I was rooted to the spot, eyes locked on the screen. Suddenly, the figure vanished from the feed. For a few moments, everything was silent. Then, a loud knock at the front door shattered the quiet. I froze. No one else should be awake at this hour. I didn't want to look, but my curiosity and fear won over. I slowly crept to the door and peered through the peephole. Nothing. The porch was empty, but muddy footprints led away into the darkness. As I stepped back, my phone buzzed with a message. "You looked." After that night, the visits didn't stop. If anything, they got worse. The figure sometimes appeared closer, almost pressed against the camera lens, its glowing eyes piercing through the screen like it was trying to see inside me. One morning, I woke up to find strange symbols scratched into the wood of my front door. Sharp, jagged marks I hadn't seen before. The metallic scent was stronger than ever. My dreams were invaded by the figure's presence. I'd wake up gasping, feeling cold breath on my neck, and the sound of whispers just beyond hearing. I tried reaching out to paranormal experts, friends, even random strangers online who'd experienced similar things. Some suggested it was a residual haunting. Others said it was a digital entity feeding on fear. But none had answers or solutions. I feel trapped in a nightmare where technology has become a doorway to something malevolent, something ancient, waiting patiently for the right moment to cross into our world. Every night, as the clock strikes 2:11 a.m., the camera lights up with the figure's presence, and my heart shatters a little more. I don't know how much longer I can endure this. I'm writing this now to warn anyone who might experience the same. If you see someone standing at your door every night at 2:11 a.m., don't look, don't respond, because some doorbells aren't just calling you, they're calling something else. After weeks of torment, my life became a relentless cycle of fear and exhaustion, each day blurring into the next as the figure's nightly visits continued without fail. The 2:11 a.m. moment was no longer just a time on the clock. It was a countdown to dread, a looming presence that dominated every waking thought. Sleep was a stranger, chased away by nightmares so vivid I would wake soaked in sweat, the metallic scent of that unseen visitor lingering in the air. I began documenting everything in desperate detail. The exact times, the figure's posture, the subtle changes in the footage, the messages that arrived like twisted invitations to despair. I noticed that on some nights, the figure's eyes flickered with something almost human, a flicker of pain or anger, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by the cold, empty stare that had haunted me from the start. One particularly harrowing night, as the clock ticked closer to 2:11, the camera's live feed froze, then glitched wildly, flickering between the image of my porch and a dark, endless void filled with whispering voices. I heard my name called softly, each syllable like a razor against my nerves. When the image finally stabilized, the figure was gone. But on my doorstep lay a single, weathered key that hadn't been there moments before. I picked it up with trembling hands, feeling the cold metal bite into my skin. What it unlocked, I didn't know. The key became a new obsession, a puzzle piece in the nightmare I was living. I tried to throw it away, to lose it in the trash or flush it down the toilet, but it always reappeared on my desk, under my pillow, tucked inside my jacket pocket, as if it were bound to me. Paranoia took root deep inside. I started locking myself in the basement, turning off all the lights, trying to outrun the watching eyes. But the figure found ways to reach me there, appearing on other devices. The security camera in my backyard, the baby monitor I didn't even own, reflections in my TV screen. I reached out to a local historian, desperate to understand if the key might be linked to anything. An old lock, a hidden room, a secret buried beneath my home. She told me about a series of unexplained disappearances linked to my neighborhood decades ago, and a mysterious locked cellar in a long-abandoned house nearby. Could the key fit there? Was the figure trying to lead me somewhere? Every instinct screamed for me to run, but the dread of the unknown held me captive. I knew that if I followed the key, I might uncover something terrifying, something I might not survive. And yet I couldn't ignore it. One night, after the usual haunting at 2:11 a.m., I grabbed a flashlight, the key, and my phone, and ventured into the darkness toward the abandoned house. The air was thick with decay and old secrets, the shadows alive with whispering voices. The door creaked open under the key's cold touch, revealing a staircase leading down into a darkness that seemed to swallow the light. My phone camera flickered, and through the static, I saw the figure standing at the bottom of the stairs, waiting. Its eyes burned red, its grin wider than humanly possible. It beckoned me forward. I don't know what I'm walking into, but I know there's no turning back now. I'm sharing this because if you ever see that figure standing at your door at 2:11 a.m., don't ignore it. Don't hope it will go away. It's not just waiting, it's inviting you in. And once you answer, the nightmare never ends. The moment I descended those rotting wooden stairs, clutching the cold key like a lifeline, the air shifted, the heavy stench of decay replaced by something darker, more ancient. The beam from my flashlight flickered as if struggling against an unseen force, and the walls seemed to close in around me, suffocating and endless. My phone, recording everything, caught fleeting glimpses of shadows moving just beyond the light, twisting into shapes that made my blood run cold. At the bottom of the stairs lay a door, old and warped, the keyhole beckoning like a mouth waiting to swallow me whole. I hesitated, heart hammering in my chest, knowing that unlocking it would cross a threshold I couldn't undo. Yet the figure's presence was undeniable. It was here, just beyond that door, watching, waiting for me to open the final seal. I slid the key into the lock. It turned with a sickening grind, like bones scraping together, and the door creaked open to reveal a narrow, pitch-black passage descending deeper beneath the earth. A low hum echoed, vibrating in my bones, and the metallic scent was overwhelming now, thick and choking. Steeling myself, I stepped inside, the door slamming shut behind me with a thunderous boom that shook the ground. The camera on my phone caught a flicker, a pair of glowing eyes watching from the shadows, and then a whisper that crawled over my skin like ice. You came. The tunnel seemed to stretch infinitely, twisting and turning in impossible ways. Time lost all meaning as I stumbled forward, each step echoing in the void. I felt eyes everywhere, watching, judging, waiting. Then, the whispering grew louder, voices layered over each other in a cacophony of desperate pleas and sinister promises. Images flashed in my mind, faces twisted in agony, trapped between worlds, their stories forever bound to this dark place. And then I saw it, the figure from the camera, no longer a distant watcher but a physical presence blocking the path ahead. Its form was more terrifying up close. Skin pale and stretched tight over a skull-like face, eyes glowing with an unholy light, and a mouth filled with sharp, jagged teeth curved into a cruel smile. It spoke without moving its lips, the voice echoing in my head. You called me. Now you belong. I tried to back away, but the ground beneath me shifted, trapping me in place as the tunnel walls closed in. The whispers turned into screams, and the metallic scent became a choking fog. My vision blurred, and I felt myself slipping into something else, something darker. The last thing I saw was the figure's eyes, burning with triumph, before everything went black. I don't know how I'm writing this now, if I'm alive or trapped somewhere between, but the doorbell camera still records every night at 2:11 a.m. The figure is still there, waiting for the next person to answer the call. If you see it on your screen, don't hesitate. Run. Don't open the door, because once the key turns, there's no way back from the darkness. I'm not sure how I'm still here to tell this story, or if I'm even truly alive anymore. After that night, after the door slammed shut behind me and the darkness swallowed everything, reality twisted in ways I can barely describe. I woke up in my bed, drenched in cold sweat, the metallic scent still clinging to my skin. But something was different. The figure never left my doorbell camera feed again. Instead, it appeared everywhere. Reflections in windows, static on my TV, faint shadows lurking at the edge of my vision. My phone still buzzes each morning with new messages. sometimes images, sometimes nothing but silence. I'm trapped in a cycle, caught between waking and dreaming, the figure's presence a constant reminder that some doors should never be opened. I've tried to warn others, shared my story online, but the responses are always the same. Disbelief, dismissals, or worse, silence. Maybe the figure wants it that way. Maybe it feeds on skepticism as much as fear. So here I am, sharing this with you, hoping you'll understand. If you ever see a figure standing at your door every night at 2:11 a.m., don't watch, don't answer, and for God's sake, don't open that door. Because some horrors don't just knock. They wait until you invite them in. And once you do, there's no turning back. I'm still waiting, still watching, hoping someone else hears this warning before it's too late. Story 7. I've never told anyone this before because I'm afraid they'll think I'm crazy. But every night, when the house falls silent and the world outside fades away, I see him. The twin brother I never really knew. He died as a baby, or so everyone says, but there's no denying the figure that appears in the mirror across from my bed. It started when I was a kid, maybe 6 or 7 years old. The first time I saw a pale, tiny face staring back at me, a fragile baby with dark eyes that seemed too old for his age. At first, I thought it was my imagination. How could it not be? But night after night, the image grew clearer. The baby's eyes more intense, his presence more tangible. I told my parents once, but they just smiled sadly and said it was because I missed him, that I should be grateful for the family I have. But it didn't stop. He never spoke, never blinked or moved, but his eyes followed me, full of sorrow and something else I couldn't name. I would wake up frozen, heart pounding, unable to look away from the mirror. As I grew older, the appearances became more frequent. Not just at night, but in reflections in windows, in the shiny surface of my computer screen, even in spoons left on the kitchen table. I started to dread mirrors altogether, covering them up, avoiding eye contact with my own reflection because I was terrified of what I might see behind it. The figure never changed, always the same pale baby, with a thin, haunted face that looked older than it should, a silent presence trapped in glass. I began researching, desperate to understand what I was experiencing. I read stories about twins separated by death, about spirits bound by unfinished business, about the ways the dead might reach out through mirrors, the portals between worlds. Nothing explained why my brother was there or what he wanted. I asked my parents about the night he died, hoping for some clue, but they refused to talk, their faces dark with grief and secrets. One night, I stayed up, staring at the mirror with the lights off, daring him to appear. When he did, he blinked. It was the first time he moved, and it shattered something inside me. His eyes filled with tears that never fell, and I felt an unbearable sadness wash over me. I whispered, "Why are you here?" But the silence was deafening. After that night, the baby in the mirror seemed more desperate, sometimes reaching a tiny hand toward me, fingers pressing against the glass as if trying to break free. I felt trapped too, caught between fear and love, between the living and the dead. My life became a struggle to ignore the mirror, to pretend he wasn't there, but every night, without fail, he's waiting. I don't know what he wants, or if I'm the only one who can see him, but I'm terrified that one night, the mirror won't be a barrier anymore, that he'll step through. And when that happens, I don't know if I'll be able to stop him, or if I even want to. The nights after I saw him blink, everything changed. The presence wasn't just a passive image anymore. It became something alive, something that felt like it was trying to communicate, to reach out. I started hearing faint noises, soft whispers echoing around my room just after midnight, like a lullaby sung by a voice too fragile to fully form. Sometimes, I'd wake up to find my bedroom mirror fogged up, even though the air was dry and cold, as if someone had been breathing close to it. I'd wipe it clean and catch a glimpse of his pale face staring back at me before it vanished. The line between reality and nightmare blurred. My parents' silence became unbearable. I pressed them again about my twin, but they only shook their heads, warning me not to dwell on the past. One night, my mother finally broke down, telling me that when my brother died, something changed, something dark and restless. She said the doctors had said it was sudden infant death syndrome, but she believed it was something more, something unnatural. That the spirit of my brother had lingered too long in the world, caught between life and death, refusing to move on. That's when I realized I wasn't just seeing a ghost. I was witnessing a soul trapped in torment. My dreams were invaded by his face, and I started feeling him around me during the day. A cold touch on my arm, the sensation of a breath on my neck, the soft rustle of blankets like he was trying to crawl close. I became obsessed with mirrors, carrying small ones with me, afraid that if I looked away, he might come closer. Friends and family noticed my withdrawal, but I couldn't explain what was happening without sounding insane. I reached out to a local medium, hoping for answers or relief. When she looked into my eyes, she gasped and whispered, "He's tethered to you, more than a brother, almost like a shadow. He's lost, angry, and confused." She warned me that spirits like this could sometimes latch onto the living, feeding off their emotions, growing stronger and more dangerous. The medium performed a cleansing ritual, burning sage and chanting ancient prayers, but the mirror in my room remained ominously silent during the session. After she left, the whispers returned, louder and more desperate. One night, as I stared into the mirror, the baby's reflection changed. The tears that once silently fell now spilled freely, his mouth opening wide in a silent scream. I stumbled back in horror as a voice echoed in my mind, "Help me!" From that moment on, I knew the spirit wasn't just a passive presence. It was reaching out for salvation or something darker. My nights became a battleground between love and fear, between holding on and letting go. I feared that if I refused to acknowledge him, the restless spirit might turn malevolent. But if I embraced him, I might lose myself in the process. The mirror's surface seemed thinner now, like a fragile barrier barely holding back a storm. Sometimes, I swear I could see his hand pushing through, cracking the glass. And I wonder, with a growing dread, what will happen the night he finally breaks free. The weight of those nightly encounters grew heavier with each passing week, crushing the thin veil of normalcy I tried desperately to maintain. Every morning, I'd wake feeling hollow, as if some part of me had been left behind in the mirror's dark reflection. The baby's face haunted every corner of my thoughts. His eyes, once just sorrowful, now glowed with a cold, unnatural light that seemed to pierce through the glass and into my soul. One night, unable to bear the silence anymore, I whispered to the mirror, "What do you want from me?" The reflection rippled as if disturbed by an unseen breeze, and the faintest outline of a smile crept across the baby's face. But it wasn't a smile of innocence. It was twisted, eerie, like a premonition of something terrible. From that night forward, the boundaries between my world and his began to blur. I started waking in places I didn't remember going to. A stairwell, a cold basement, a shadowed hallway that didn't exist in my house. I'd find scratches on my arms in the morning, shallow but deliberate, as if someone or something was trying to mark me. My reflection changed too. Sometimes, I caught glimpses of the baby standing behind me, a ghostly shadow just out of reach. Friends grew concerned as I withdrew further into this haunting reality. One night, I dreamt I was a child again, cradling a fragile baby in my arms. His eyes, so dark and empty, stared into mine, whispering, "Come with me." I refused, but the dream felt too real, the pull too strong. It was a warning or a promise. I started keeping a journal, writing down every detail. The times he appeared, the way the mirror fogged, the chilling voice that echoed in my mind. In the margins, I sketched his face, trying to capture the twisted mix of innocence and menace that plagued my nights. Seeking answers, I visited the local library and unearthed old records about twins and spirits trapped between worlds. One entry described a ritual meant to sever the tether between a living person and a restless spirit. Desperate, I gathered the items listed: candles, salt, a mirror covered with a black cloth. The night I performed the ritual, the air grew thick with tension. As I recited the ancient words, the mirror's surface darkened and the baby's face appeared, screaming silently, eyes burning like embers. The glass cracked, spiderwebbing outwards, and I felt a cold hand grip my wrist. I froze, terror rooting me to the spot as the spirit fought to stay tethered. Then, with a final, chilling scream that echoed through my mind, the figure vanished. The mirror lay shattered at my feet. For a brief moment, relief washed over me, but it was fleeting, because even though the physical reflection was gone, I could still feel him, in the quiet moments before sleep, in the corners of my vision, a whisper on the wind. The tether had been broken, but the bond remained. And I knew, deep down, that one day he might find another way back. Even though the mirror lay shattered on the floor, pieces of it scattered like fractured memories, the terror didn't end. If anything, it grew worse. Without the mirror's glass to trap him, the presence became more corporeal, more invasive. I could feel him in every shadow, hear his faint crying echoing through the empty rooms, smell that faint metallic tang, the scent of forgotten things and sorrow. Sleep became impossible. The boundary between waking and dreaming dissolved as he haunted every moment. Friends who dared to come near me would tell me they felt cold spots, sudden chills, and once, one even swore she saw a tiny figure dart behind me, only to vanish before she could point it out. My parents finally broke their silence, revealing things I never wanted to hear. That my brother's death had been surrounded by strange occurrences, objects moving on their own, unexplained noises, and my mother's desperate attempts to protect the family from what she believed was a curse. She confessed to covering the mirrors in the house when I was a baby, fearing the spirit's wrath. But the shattered mirror in my room was new, placed just weeks before I saw the baby's face. My father, usually stoic, admitted he had felt watched ever since, a presence stalking the house like a shadow with no form. I began seeing a therapist, hoping to ground myself in reality, but even there, the boundaries were thin. One session, I caught a reflection in the window behind my doctor, brief but unmistakable, of a pale baby face watching me, eyes glowing with that terrible light. I smiled. I realized then that this wasn't just a family haunting. It was a curse, a tether of dark energy bound to my twins' tragic death. The spirit wasn't seeking peace. It was seeking life, and maybe even vengeance. Desperation drove me to consult a local spiritualist known for dealing with restless spirits and curses. She told me bluntly that my twin spirit was trapped between worlds because of the violent nature of his death and the grief left unspoken in the family. That grief had turned into something twisted, a dark bond that fed on pain and fear. She warned that unless I confronted it fully, the spirit could consume me, or worse, take me with it into the shadows. Armed with rituals, charms, and the strength of will I barely possessed, I prepared for one last confrontation. The night was stormy, rain pelting the windows like angry fists. I lit candles, sprinkled salt around my room, and sat facing the largest piece of the shattered mirror I had managed to keep. As the clock struck midnight, the room grew deathly cold, and that unbearable metallic scent filled the air. Slowly, the baby's face appeared in the shard of glass, larger and more vivid than ever, eyes glowing with sorrow and fury. He reached out a hand, fingers curling like claws. "Why won't you let me go?" I whispered, voice shaking. The spirit's silent scream shattered the air, a piercing sound that rattled my bones. For what felt like hours, I battled the presence, willing it to find peace, to release me to rest. Then, just as dawn broke, the spirit's form wavered and faded, leaving only the faintest echo of a lullaby in the wind. Exhausted but hopeful, I covered the mirror shard and vowed never to let grief fester into darkness again. But even now, when the house is quiet and the night is still, I catch glimpses of those eyes in reflections, brief, fleeting, like a shadow waiting patiently for the next time the mirror cracks. In the weeks that followed the ritual, I clung to a fragile hope that the worst was behind me. The relentless terror that had haunted every moment of my waking and sleeping hours seemed to ebb, leaving a fragile silence that was both a relief and an uneasy pause. But the peace was deceptive. A thin veil stretched over a storm ready to break. It started subtly at first, small things out of place, the faintest whispers barely audible in the quietest hours, and that lingering metallic scent that seemed to seep into the very walls of the house. I would glance at any reflective surface and catch, just out of focus, the outline of a pale infant face. A fleeting glimpse that vanished the instant I tried to look directly. My heart would slam in my chest every time, a reminder that the barrier between worlds was thinner than I ever dared imagine. Then, the dreams returned, darker and more vivid than before. In these nightmares, I was no longer an observer but a participant, trapped in a cold, shadowed nursery where the baby, my twin, sat in a crib, eyes glowing with an unnatural light, whispering promises I couldn't understand. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped. The room closed in, suffocating and endless, the lullaby twisting into a haunting melody that echoed in my mind long after I woke. The physical world began to twist in tandem. I would find scratches etched deep into walls and furniture, marks that weren't there before, jagged and erratic as if clawed by tiny hands desperate to escape. My reflection became a battlefield. Sometimes, when I looked in the mirror, my face would blur and shift, replaced for a heartbeat by the hollow-eyed baby whose presence had invaded my life. His mouth would curl into a cruel smile before fading away, leaving me gasping and trembling. Friends stopped visiting. The isolation grew like a shadow around me. The fear wasn't just that he was there, but that he was waiting, growing stronger, and preparing for something beyond my understanding. My parents, too, became distant, wrapped in their own fears and regrets, unwilling or unable to help me bear this burden. One evening, desperate for answers, I returned to the spiritualist who had helped me before. She listened quietly as I described the escalating terror, the unbearable sensation of being hunted by a force born of grief and death. Her eyes grew dark, and she spoke a warning that chilled me to my core. The veil thins when grief remains unspoken, when bonds are broken by silence and pain. Your brother's spirit is not at rest because the story of his death remains buried, tangled in secrets your family has never shared. Until the truth is faced, he cannot find peace, and neither can you. Determined to end the nightmare, I began piecing together the fragments of my family's past. Secret conversations overheard, old photographs hidden away, whispered confessions of pain and guilt. What I uncovered shattered my world. My brother's death had not been natural. There were whispers of neglect, of a night when my parents were too drunk or distracted to notice the baby's cries, of a moment when the fragile life was lost amidst chaos and silence. The guilt was suffocating, a poison that had festered for years, binding his spirit to this world like chains of sorrow and rage. Armed with this terrible truth, I knew I had to confront not just the spirit, but my family's buried pain. I called them together one stormy night, the air heavy with tension and unspoken words. Together, we sat before the shattered mirror shard, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows across tear-streaked faces. We spoke aloud the truth for the first time, naming the grief, the guilt, and the love that had been tangled in silence for too long. The air grew cold, and in the flickering reflection, the baby appeared once more. But this time his eyes held something different. Acceptance, maybe even relief. A soft, almost imperceptible smile curled his lips before he slowly faded away, leaving behind only the faint scent of rain and the distant echo of a lullaby. The house seemed lighter after that night, the oppressive weight lifting like a morning mist. I still sometimes catch a flicker in a mirror or a shadow in the corner of my eye, but the terror has eased into something quieter, like a memory settling finally into rest. I write this not just as a warning, but as a reminder that some spirits linger not because they seek harm, but because the living have forgotten to grieve fully. If you ever see the face of a lost loved one in your reflection, don't turn away in fear. Look deeper, listen, and don't be afraid to face the truth. Only then can the restless find peace, and the living reclaim their lives from the shadows.